Okay, so this is the World Alliance of Qara'im weekly Torah study. Thousands upon thousands of people each week listening to this Torah study. So we're hoping we might reach 10,000. We might reach a rivava of people today, we're hoping. So, no, but we hope that in the future that more and more people will start listening in. Anyway, we wish you all a Shabbat Shalom. And we're going to get started with the Torah study, I suppose. And any intro you want to say before we start with the actual dig into the Torah?
No, I just want to say I appreciate everyone who's joining us live. And even if you don't join us live, the comments are always open on both Facebook and YouTube. So feel free to comment.
Yeah. We appreciate everyone who joins us live, which it seems to imply that we don't appreciate anyone who does not join us live.
No.
No, we're joking. I'm just a joker. All right. We appreciate everybody. So, all right, should we get down to business here?
Sure.
Okay. So we have Ele Toldot Noah, Ish, Tzaddik, Tamim, Haya Bedorotav, Et HaElohim Hitalech Noah. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. Anything you would like to say?
I'll let you start.
Okay, well, I mean, the first thing that I would like to say is that the rabbis always point out the word Bedorotav, that he was a righteous and perfect man in his generations, and they usually use that to say, well, he wouldn't have been a righteous person if he lived in other generations, but in this particular generation, because it was such a wicked generation, by contrast, he was a righteous man. I'm not sure if I buy that explanation.
No, I don't buy that at all.
Yeah, I think that just seems like, rabbinical casuistry. It's a word that my friend of mine always used to love to use, so I try to use it as much as possible. It makes me sound very intelligent, more intelligent than I would otherwise be given credit for if I didn't use such fancy words. So, but it really is. It's the kind of thing that the rabbis will pick up on a word, and they'll kind of over literalize it and then make a midrash off of it, or making understanding off of it. So I also don't think so. I think the simple reading here is just that he was a righteous person. A righteous person is a righteous person, no matter what generation they live in. It's not by comparison to the rest of the generation, if you ask me. I mean, obviously we're all influenced by where we live and the times we're living through, but righteousness is something that is eternal. And so you can always find it no matter where you are, just as a Lot found it in his own simple way, kind of, even living in Sodom. Anyway, so the other thing I'd like to point out here is it says a bedorotav. It doesn't say bedoro. It says bedorotav, in his generations. So how do you explain that one? Any insight?
Well, it could just imply the fact that, normally we look at generations as from one time, from the time one's born till the next generation of when the children are born, or so forth. Sometimes it's not always clear cut. For instance, when God told Abraham that his children or his descendants would be 400 years in Egypt as slaves. He also said in the fourth generation they would return. And so that seemed to imply that a generation at the time of Abraham was about 100 years. But that's not necessarily true. It seems that way. And so Noah was almost 1,000 years old. He was like 900 and something. And so you had lots of people being born from the time he himself was born. So when it says in his generations, that could be from the time that he was born and all those generations that came about after him until the flood came.
Okay, interesting explanation. I tend to think it just means it's using the plural as kind of an abstract word, so it just means in his, in generations, not in as talking about a specific generation, but like in his era, maybe I guess I would translate it as, or something along those lines. I guess I can check it out with my favorite translator, but I won't bother this time. And the other thing I want to point out in this verse, it says Et Elohim hitalech Noach. So that's that's a word we don't see often, and we see it elsewhere, famously with what's his name again? What?
Abraham.
No, yeah, with Abraham, does it use it with Abraham? Yes, it does. But I was thinking more of with I'm sorry, who was it again? The name escapes me for some reason. I'm having a mental block. The one who was taken by God, Hanoch. Yes, of course. So
in the story of Abraham, it's interesting because the first we'll get to that next, but when God first speaks to Abraham, he uses the imperative to be a blessing,
right?
And then later he says be. He uses the same verb where he says be a blessing. He says be, or he says hit halik lefanai wihi tamim. He says walk before me and be perfect. And throughout the Tanakh, we see a correlation between tamim and hit halik et Elohim.
Interesting. Okay.
And also the word shalem. In Devarim, I think it's Devarim, God says, "You shall be tamim with your God." And later, Shlomo, he says that you should have your hearts shalem with your God, to walk in His commandments and so forth. And so it's just an interesting parallel between those three words throughout the Tanakh.
Okay, interesting. That's a nice point. I'm going to keep an eye at this. So, hitalech, shalem, and tamim. I like that. Okay, verse Genesis chapter 5, verse 22, speaking about Hanoch, v'yit halech. And by the way, does it say that Hanoch was perfect? Let's see here, just out of curiosity. Hanoch, 800, Yered, blah, 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 ויהי חנוך 65 שנה, ויולד את מתושלח, ויתהלך חנוך את האלוהים, and this is Genesis chapter 5, verse 22. ויתהלך חנוך את האלוהim, so Hanoch walked with God, אחרי הולידו את מתושלח, after giving birth to מתושלח, 300 שנה, for 300 years, יולד בנים ובנות, and he gave birth to sons and daughters. Verse 23, chapter 5, verse 23. ויהי כל ימי חנוך 65 שנה, and all of the days of Hanoch were 65, basically 365 years, which I just realized is very interesting. 365, right?
A whole year.
That's a whole year. I mean, I'm not into numerology or anything like that.
No.
But, it is interesting that it just turns out to be 365. I'm sure somewhere somebody has made, or many commentators have probably pointed that out, but I never realized it before.
I didn't either until you just mentioned it.
Yeah. V'yitalech Hanoch, verse 24, V'yitalech Hanoch et Elohim, and Hanoch walked with God, ve'enenu, and he was no more, ki lakach oto Elohim, because God took him. Okay, so there we have an example of another person who walked with God, as Noah is walking with God. So
I would like to just add, in Hebrew, the verb forms, sometimes are really interesting. There's several different ways to express a concept or an idea. When we say halak, the verb halok, or lalechet, however you want to say it, the idea is to go, to walk, to go somewhere.
Yep.
Now, that's just the simple form of it. Now we have this word hithalech, which is actually in a verb form called the hitpael.
Right.
The hitpael by nature doesn't always have to be, but it is very often used as both a reciprocal when you're doing something for or to yourself, and it can also no, it's reflexive when you're doing it to or for yourself, and it's reciprocal when you're doing it in conjunction with somebody.
Right.
Which is interesting. We have this verb form hithalek, which means that it can mean, doesn't necessarily have to mean. It could just have a simple meaning in itself that he just walked with God. But it's interesting that it could imply that not only did Noah walk with God, but God walked with him. And we see that an idea of this later in the Torah, where it says that we're to walk with God and not walk contrary to him. But if we do, we'll go into exile. And we're told that while we're in exile, we'll remember why we're in exile. We'll confess our sins and confess also that God walked contrary to us. So, and also with the Mishkan, which was the dwelling, God's dwelling upon this earth, he was said to walk with us. He walked amongst us in the camp. And so, to me, I would think it would be a bit reciprocal. God saw that Noah was righteous. He was Sadiq, and he was also perfect, Tamim. And he later says, "I've only found you, only you." And so God blessed Noah and saved the entire human race because of him. And so that's just something. Maybe useless information.
Okay, not useless at all. But I'd like to point out one or two things. So you mentioned that the hitpael form, which is I remember when we were learning many years ago when I was learning Hebrew, and that was considered the most complicated form. That was the last one we learned, the seventh binyanim. For those of you who are into Hebrew grammar, is usually called the reflexive, but as Yaakov pointed out, it can also be a reciprocal if it's talking about more than one person, and that's expressed in the classic modern Israeli not greeting, but when you leave someone, departure greeting, not departure greeting, but departure words where people say to each other lehitraot, which is the reflexive form of ro'eh, and is usually translated as we will see each other, right? So there you have a classic example in modern Hebrew of where the hitpael form is used not as reflexive but as reciprocal. So if you're going, if anyone who knows in Israel obviously knows this, if you're leaving, if you're departing someone, you say lehitraot, which I guess literally in the reflexive form would mean it's a command form. It will say I will see myself, but when the reciprocal, it means we will see each other. Okay, usually it's kind of translated as see you later, but that's what it means. So there's an example in modern Hebrew of the hitpael form being used as the reciprocal. Now I wanted to read my favorite translator slash commentator. What's his name again? I have him right in front of me. I can't remember his name.
Robert something
Alter.
wasn't it?
Yeah,
Oh,
Robert Alter. And this is what he says about and Hanoch walked with God. This cryptic verse has generated mountains of speculative commentary, not to speak of two whole books of the Apocrypha, right? For instance, the book of Hanoch. There is a book in the Apocrypha called the Book of Hanoch, the book of Enoch. The reflexive form of the verb to walk that occurs here is the same form used for God's walking about in the Garden of Eden. Instead of the flat report of death, as in the case of the other antediluvians, the euphemism was no more, literally was not, which is also applied to Joseph, merely supposed by his brothers to be dead, right? That's what they tell Yaakov, right? Joseph is no more, is used. Walked with surely implies some sort of special intimate relationship with God, but what that might be is anyone's guess. This is one of several. Then it goes on to something else, which I don't think. Okay, I'll read it anyway. This is one of several instances in the early chapters of Genesis facing Genesis of a teasing vestige of a tradition for which the context is lost. Enoch is the seventh generation from Adam, and some scholars have seen an instructive analogy in the Mesopotamian list of kings before the deluge, in which the seventh antediluvian king, a certain Enmendur-Anki, is taken up to sit before the gods Shamash and Adad, and is granted preternatural wisdom. Shamash is the sun god, and the biblical Enoch lives as many years as the days of the solar year. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'm telling you,
Enki
I love this guy.
becomes
He really brings things
Ea.
out. He really brings some interesting things out. I have it on my Nook, on Barnes and Noble. I can share it with you later. Okay, if you let me. Yeah, I mean, if it's possible from the family sharing. But okay, yes. So okay, so I think we've basically picked that verse apart about as much as anyone could. So now we're up to the next verse, and we have ויולד נוח שלושה בנים, את שם, את חם ואת יפת. So, okay, so we know about that, and we see who these, we get full descendancy tables for all three of these sons, and so generally it's considered that Shem is settles in the Middle East or so, around the Middle East. That's why Middle Easterners are called Semites, Shemites, and Ham settles towards the south, Africa, and Yafet settles towards the north, Europe. So that's the general considered plan, but I don't know if that bears itself out. Yaakov, any ideas, any thoughts, any commentary?
The list of nations in the Torah are very I don't want to say cryptic, but they're ambiguous. At least there's only a few nations that are supposedly kept around or left over from today that we might be able to draw who's who. One thing is interesting is the land of Canaan. Canaan is actually a son of Ham. He's the brother of Mitzrayim.
Yeah.
So Ham is the father of Mitzrayim, Put, and the Canaan. And it's the Canaanites who are said, or it is Canaan who is said to be the father of the Canaanites, which would be Het, Yebus, and the other nations that were eventually dispossessed by the Israelites later. And the name Canaan actually means to be subdued, which we'll see later on in the story that it was Canaan who was dispossessed and basically cursed to be a slave to Shem, which later came to fulfillment when the Israelites took his possession or his land, his area of land. But the one of the names of Africa, or not necessarily Africa, but Egypt itself, was called Kemet, and this actually means the land of Ham. And there's also a place called Hamat, which is at the northern border of Israel, which is now actually a part of, I think, Syria. I think that's Syria today, where you have Hamat there. So you have two names for Ham, or the land of Ham, that's called Hamat, at the northern border of what's today Israel in Syria, and then also in Egypt.
Cool. All right. Next verse.
Next verse.
Let me just say, this one will console us. Okay. I'm sorry, I got 6, 5. Okay. And I'll just read Robert Alter for that one. No, wait a second. No, found favorite line. Okay, and Yafet. Okay. All right. All right. Go ahead.
Okay. وتشحيت هآرت لفنيها إلهيم وتملي هآرت حماس. And so the earth was destroyed in the presence of God, and the earth was filled with Hamas, which means violence, or even corruption.
Right.
I put it called corruption as well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that it talks about violence filling the land. When at the end of last week's parasha, we read about the descendants of Cain, who became the fathers of those who dwell in houses, the fathers of, which means the progenitor. He's the first one to have a house. His descendants were the first ones to begin to take possession of things, and also the first to make instruments of music, and also the first to hone iron. And now we have violence filling the earth, and you could just imagine that these people living such a long time, and the side of Cain taking possession, wanting to take possession of all the resources and so forth, perhaps all the good land.
Okay. And just point out that tishachet means destroyed in the sense of, it's usually translated as became corrupted.
Corrupted,
They're not destroyed. Right. Obviously. Okay. And Robert Alter translates Hamas as outrage.
Yeah, outrage.
Which is an interesting translation because I think that actually makes I think that actually makes a lot of sense, right? In the sense that God is now going to come down and look, right? It's the outrage. The idea of outrage is just something calling out from the land, right? The land is calling out itself. The people that are the victims of all this injustice are calling out, and God comes down and takes a look. You know, the response to outrage is is basically to put things back in order, to do justice, and God is going to do that by destroying the earth again.
Yep.
But
Well, one of the punishments to Cain, it was a little bit different than what was to the parents. For the parents, they just had they ended up leaving the garden,
right,
and it said that Adam would have to toil on the land,
right, right,
and that he would have problems with the thorns and weeds or whatever coming up. But for Cain, it wasn't. It was a little more severe. It says that no longer will the earth give its strength to you, which means he would have problems just living off the land, which is why it was probably necessary for him to settle down and start taking possession of the animal resources in his vicinity.
Okay. Yep. Could be. But then it says he'll be nav and nod. He'll always be wandering. So. So I don't think there's any implication that he himself settled down.
His son. Actually, when Cain left, he built a city. That was the first thing he did, and he named it Hanuk after his son.
Right. Okay. I mean, okay, fair enough. I mean, I don't know if the implication is that he lived in that city, but maybe it is. Okay. At any rate, so
Next verse.
Hamas. Yeah, next verse. Okay. VR. Let's turn this on the side. Okay. VR Elohim et haaretz. Vehine nishhata ki hishrit kol basar et darko al haaretz. And God beheld, I guess you would translate it as, the earth, and behold, nishchata, it had become corrupt. Ki hishchit kol basar et dadko al haaretz, because all flesh had corrupted its way on upon the earth. So there's this idea that's repeated many times throughout the Tanakh of God coming down and taking a look at something, right? The most prominent example that comes to mind is in Exodus when the whale of the Israelites, whale WAIL, not WHLE, the whale of the Israelites, came up to heaven, and God decided to come down and no, I'm sorry. I don't know if it uses that analogy there. I'm sorry. It might say something a little bit different. But where it definitely does is the whale of Sodom, the cry of Sodom calling up to heaven, and then God says, "I'm going to come down and take a look." So this idea, and that's why I think that Robert Alter's translation of outrage is such a brilliant translation. I'd never seen that one before. If I did, I forgot it. That the idea of outrage, it just cries out to heaven, for God to come down and take a look and do something. But it's a very interesting analogy that people who would say that, oh, this is anthropomorphization of God, or that the Torah is, this is a ridiculous document because what do you mean God came down and looked at the earth? He doesn't see it from up in heaven. He doesn't see anything. He's God. He's omnipotent, and this just shows it shows a basic lack of understanding of the Torah, of the subtlety of Israelite thought, of Jewish thought, and the idea is that God turns. The idea is that God at a certain time, for a certain reason, turns his attention. He turns his focus towards what's going on, and that's what it means. And I'm gonna relate it to a couple of other things in a second. But the idea would be that, okay, if you notice, in one's life, it's you really can't turn your focus to more than one thing at a given time. So I don't know. I'll give an example of let's say doing tasks in the house. A lot of times when I'm doing tasks in the house, let's say I want to put the laundry in the washing machine. So I'll start putting the laundry in the washing machine, and then all of a sudden, as I'm carrying the laundry in the washing machine, I don't know. I'll see. I don't know. Let's say something on the floor that needs to be picked up, and I'll start picking stuff up from the floor, and then I'll completely forget about the washing machine. Then, like 5 or 10 minutes later, I'll be, oh right, I was putting clothes in the washing machine, right? Because when we turn our focus, our what's the word, our concentration towards one thing or towards another thing, and that's where our action becomes. Our focus leads to our action, and that's where the action is directed. Okay, so since we're made in the image of God, I think that's obviously, I guess God can do what he wants. I guess he can multitask if he wants. If a computer, if a Windows operating system can multitask, then certainly God can. But I think that the idea is that at a certain point he turns his focus and he turns his attention towards a certain thing. Not that he doesn't know all and isn't capable of knowing all, but that he hasn't turned his attention towards it. And this analogy of coming down and seeing what's going on, coming down, literally it says coming down to see, right? In the case of Sodom, is this idea of kind of turning his attention towards it, dealing with it. Now saying, okay, now this is my next on my to-do list. Let's see what's going on here and deal with it. It's a similar idea of when with the word pakad, right? Which is now that is used in the case of Israel and the Exodus. That God, it's pakad is usually that's pei kuf dalet. It's usually translated as remembered. Or visited, sometimes they'll translate it as, but it's actually much more subtle than that. It's an idea of God basically hearkening back to the time that he made a promise, and now saying, okay, now is the time the time is right. All the so to speak, the plants have aligned, and now is the time that I'm now going to act on that promise. I'm going to come down and I'm going to visit upon such and such the promise that I'd made earlier. So it's this idea that we tend to, not only do we tend to anthropomorphize God, but sometimes we tend to unanthropomorphize God. It's almost as dangerous a thing to do, where we try to give God these qualities. Oh, he can, he does a million things at once, and he does, he knows everything, and he can turn his attention to everything at once, and he doesn't have, he doesn't choose to do things at a certain time in a certain place. That's just as bad as, that's the opposite of anthropomorphization of God. And we actually see that if we are made in the image of God, and we can turn our attention, like I gave the analogy of, doing the laundry and then turning my attention to something else, and then saying, oh, I have to turn my forgetting about the laundry and then turning my attention back to the laundry. So God also can, at a given time, in a given place, for a given reason, turn his attention towards a specific thing and deal with it. And that's exactly what we see here. Okay, the outrage, the Hamas is rising up to heaven, just as the outrage in Sodom and Gomorrah later on will be rising up to heaven. And God says, okay, now I'm going to turn my attention to this. Let me go down there and check out what's going on and deal with it. So
yeah, just to expand on what you're talking about, we know that the first instance would be the instance in the garden. It seems that God was kind of aloft, or however you want to say it. He was not physically present. But when Adam and Eve did what they did, then he came to look. He said, okay, now he basically showed up in the garden. The next place we see it was in the instance of Babel, which we'll see later.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, at the time of Sodom, and then in the time of the Exodus. In fact, what you're talking about, Melech, was in Shemot 3:8, where it says, what? Yep. So I've come down to rescue him from the hand of Egypt. But the way I look at it is, we see in the Torah where God does all these different things for Israel. He comes out and he's really on the scene, and everybody could actually witness it.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, what other nation has ever been like that? That their God responds to them, walks before them, and takes care of them immediately, and so forth. So the idea is that this is not a very often occurring event. And so when I look at the idea that where it talks about God coming down, it's not that he's physically coming down, because God is omnipresent. But the idea is that he personally acts in the timeline of history. And it's at these points that he personally intervenes in the events that's going on in the world. And so more often than not, what miracles that we think God does, or what prayers he may answer for us, those are personal. They're not like done on a scale that the world would take notice. But in those cases where he actually intervenes, then the world notices. The world's like, okay. And so that's how I look at it when it talks about he comes down. It's not that he physically moves from one place to the other, but that he actually comes. He removes himself from this abstract idea into a concrete reality to
I think
in world events.
And I think we're kind of saying the same thing. And I would actually like to relate it to, I always like to go in these more slightly philosophical directions. This is what I'm thinking about. But okay, so there's a very okay, I'm going to say something that I hope is interesting. Relating to what you're saying, And relating to what I was saying, okay, we're both kind of saying the same thing. Okay, you're saying he acts in history at a certain time in a certain place, right? He's taking taking himself out of the abstract and bringing himself into the concrete, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of your point, right?
Mhm.
And I would put it, and I put it in the way of, okay, he's turning his attention, he's turning his focusing his conscience on a particular thing, okay? Now, and I also gave the analogy of, okay, you can really only focus your conscience on one given thing at a time. And I gave the analogy of doing tasks, and if you pay attention as you're doing tasks around the house, you'll notice that, or as you're doing anything, that you can really only focus on one thing at a given time. If you try to multitask, it usually is a complete failure. That's why personally I'm very against multitasking. Okay, but I don't want to go back and repeat what I was saying before. I want to expand upon that. And the way I want to expand upon that is to relate it to quantum physics, believe it or not, okay? Because it's known in quantum physics, and I don't want to get into a whole long thing about quantum physics, but it's known in quantum physics that probability waves only resolve themselves into actual, I guess you call physical manifestations when there is an observer, when a conscience is applied to it. There's a great book which I always like to mention named, and you can read a lot of books on quantum physics, and they'll all say this, that it's the whole point behind the famous double slit experiment of quantum physics, the most basic experiment in quantum physics. But if you read a book called Biocentrism, which I've mentioned I think at least one other time in our studies, he really brings it out in a very, very interesting way, showing many experiments that prove the same thing, that without an actual conscience focusing on an event, then that event actually is not even happening. It's just what they would call a probability wave. It could happen. Many things could happen, and then when the conscience focuses on specifically human, and by extension, godly conscience focuses on it, then it resolves itself into an actual physical manifestation. Okay, so it's kind of what you're saying here. He's outside of space and time. Okay, that's analogous to the probability wave of quantum physics. Okay, which is outside of space and time in the sense that it has manifested as an actual event in space time. Okay, and so he's kind of wafting up there. I guess I'm simplifying it a little bit, wafting up there and outside of space and time, and at a certain point he decides to focus his attention on a specific event at a certain point in time, and that focus of his conscience at that specific point in time is actually in a certain sense his way of coming down. It means he comes out of the ether of just eternity, of being outside of space and time, of what we experienced before we were born and what we'll experience after we die, which is complete timelessness and complete spacelessness, no part of space-time, of 3 or 4-dimensional space-time, and he actually focuses attention, and when you focus your attention, when attention is focused in quantum physics, that now also takes the probability wave out of the ether, so to speak, out of being outside of space-time, and focusing it on a specific event in space-time, and makes that event, or makes the phenomenon resolve into a specific event. In the case of the double slit experiment, it is now with the observer or with the conscience focused on what is happening, you're now able to determine whether the particle or the electron or whatever you're measuring went through the left slit or went through the right slit. Okay, so that is in a sense the meaning, it seems to me, of God coming down to the earth. He's focusing attention, bringing his focus, his conscience, his attention out of the ether of being completely outside of space-time, and now focusing it into this 3-dimensional or 4-dimensional world of space-time. And as he focuses attention, he causes an actual action to resolve, to happen in this earth. And that's kind of hearkening back to what you said about how he's acting at a specific point in history, and it actually relates very well to what I was saying as well. And we're actually saying, it actually kind of ties the two things we're saying together, because the focusing of the conscious, the coming down and seeing, is always related to an event that God does, that Yoah does on this earth, as you were saying. Okay, it's a certain point in history where he kind of comes out of the eternal ether and comes down into space-time and actually causes a certain event to occur. hope I kind of explained that well. It's a difficult concept to explain even to myself, but I hope that kind of makes sense. So anyway.
It made sense to me anyway.
Okay, good. And if anyone wants to, if anyone wants to explore these ideas more, I highly recommend even just watch a simple video on YouTube about the double slit experiment or about quantum physics, or even better, watch some of Robert Lanza is the man who wrote this book Biocentrism. You can find some of his stuff on YouTube. You can hear interviews with him, or you can read his book, and he actually points out some absolutely fascinating things. Such as, when you think about it, okay, without human consciousness, and actually he never actually addresses the issue in his book, what consciousness is able to resolve probability waves into actual particles, or into actual events, we'll put it that way. Is it if an animal looks at at something, if an animal, like this cat over here, hello cat. If he directs his attention towards towards something, does that mean that it resolves from a probability wave into an actual event? And I would say no. I think it requires human consciousness, specifically that higher level consciousness that only Yahweh himself has and that we have, because that's a special gift that Yahweh gave to us. No other creature on planet Earth is able to contemplate his own existence, is able to contemplate what happens after death, to contemplate, to write poetry and write music and all this kind of stuff. So this special human/godly consciousness is the only type of consciousness that I believe that when focused on the probability wave can resolve it into an actual event. So my point was just to point out that Robert Lanza says something very interesting, that before human beings, and of course, in the Torah, we know that human beings were created on the sixth day, whatever that means. But before that act of creation, before Yehovah put his, breathed, right? The yifach bo nishmat chaim, I think is what it says there. Before he breathed his breath into Adam, that there was no consciousness on this earth. There were no human beings on this earth to perceive all the events. To perceive basically to resolve the probability waves into actual events, which basically means that before human beings were born, there was no such concept of time and space. It's just an incredible thing when you think about it, that we were the first creatures to perceive time and space. So we only perceive that the Earth has existed for 14 billion years because we were the creatures that were able to resolve the probability waves into actual actions, which now made us see the world around us and perceive it as if it's resolved into an Earth that has existed for 14 billion years, not 14 years. But the fact of the reality is that that's just our perception, because we and Yehovah himself are the only ones able to resolve the probability waves into actual events. I know it's very complicated, and it probably sounds like mumbo jumbo if you don't know a bit of quantum physics, and I'm not an expert in quantum physics by any exaggeration of the imagination, but I have thought about this stuff a lot. It's kind of what I do in my free time, and it's just fascinating to me that the Earth really never existed until Adam was born, because he was the first creature to be able to basically use his perception to create a physical Earth. Before that, it was just all probability waves. Anyway, go read Robert Lanza's book if you get a chance, called Biocentrism, or just even watch some basic videos on YouTube about quantum physics, and maybe this will start to make a little bit more sense. Okay, anyway, enough.
There was a program I watched. I can't remember who did it. It may be the same guy that you're talking about, because as complicated as a lot of this is, and you have to really be good in mathematics to be a good theoretical physicist, and so I'm terrible at math. I really suck, but nevertheless, I still have these questions that I ponder and I love to think about. And the theoretical physicists, man, they really have done a lot of work to to expand the consciousness. And one thing that he was saying was, like Melech was saying, humans are the only ones who really conceptualize time. And for us, it becomes a real event. And because that we focus on time, it basically puts us outside of a quantum realm into a physical realm where each moment has to occur one after the other. And basically what the quantum physicists have proven is that everything that is past, present, or future is all at the same time. Everything. Time is only exists because we focus on it. But
time is Robert Lanza would say, and quantum physicists would say, and correctly so, that time is not out there. Time is a projection of our consciousness. We create time, just as you could say the world is not out there, right? I mean, this is goes back to is it Plato's cave? I think it's called, right? Where everything we see is in our head, right? You're not we perceive it as out there. I'm looking at a tree right now, and the tree is, I perceive it as out there, but the image is in my head. I'm creating that image in my head. There's not actually a tree out there. What there is a whole bunch of electromagnetic radiation, floating around, and that is even a projection of our consciousness, perhaps. But everything is time and space are a projection of our. They are what would be the correct phrase? Projection. They're a projection of our consciousness. They're a creation of our consciousness. They're the way our consciousness is able to perceive the world around us, but they're not. But time and space are not out there. They're in our head, and that's exactly what is meant. This Robert Lanza guy, what he means by biocentrism, that everything starts with the consciousness of the human being specifically. That's how the world is perceived, through our consciousness, not through what's actually out there. Our consciousness is just able to perceive it by creating something called time, by creating something called space, by creating something called colors. Colors are not out there. Okay, if I look at orange, that just means that I'm looking at an orange towel right now. That doesn't mean that there's something orange out there. It just means that electromagnetic radiation at a certain wavelength is being reflected off that towel and heading towards my eyeballs, and then it's passing, through my pupil and hitting my retina, and then the optic nerve is taking it, and then in my brain it's being converted into something which I perceive as orange. But there's nothing orange out there. There's just electromagnetic waves of, however many nanometers or whatever the measure is. I can't remember what the size of an orange electromagnetic wave is. Anyway, it's complicated stuff, and I certainly can't even claim to fully understand it, or even close to myself, but it is something that I like to think about.
It is very interesting to contemplate, nonetheless.
Yep.
And so,
definitely beats when you're sitting on a bus. It definitely beats studying the Talmud, as the Haredim do.
So the next verse.
All right. Anyway.
ויאמר אלוהים לנוח, קץ כל בשר בא לפניי, כי מלאה הארץ חמס מפניהם, והנני משחיתם את הארץ. And so God says to Noah, the end of all flesh has come before me, because the earth is filled with violence because of them, or because of their presence, from their presence.
Outrage, maybe? Yeah,
outrage, yeah. And I will, or behold, I am destroying them with the earth. Now this Mashhith, that's what's called, whenever we see the story of the Exodus, the destroyer. This is the destroyer that comes to kill the first one. Yeah. The Mashhith. And here's the participle from Shahat, which is the PL, not the PL. This is the Hifil participle, Mashhitam. But anyways, I'm killing, or I'm destroying them with the earth, along with the earth.
Right, and this harkens back clearly and deliberately to the previous verses where it says that ki nishchata haaretz ki hishchit kol basar et darko al haaretz. Right, the earth had become, as Yaakov translated it correctly, it literally means destroyed, but it's usually translated
Corrupted.
as corrupted. Ki hishchit kol basar et darko al haaretz, because all flesh had destroyed its way upon the earth. So this is exactly the same verb that's being used, and in the case of the second part of that sentence, where it says kol basar hishchit, it's the same form of the verb. It's the he-feel form of the verb shin het taf, which is to destroy. So this is, the Torah loves to use plays on words and to show different aspects or subtle meanings of words. And this is clearly a case of, this is clearly what's going on here. Okay, it's the same word exactly that we saw before that human beings were doing. They had destroyed the earth, so now God is coming down to destroy the earth, or they had corrupted the earth, so now God is coming down to corrupt the earth in the sense of destroy it. So.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and also, it makes it states, "Ki mala haaretz Hamas mipanehem." One thing we didn't get into for last week's parasha is one of the famous stories about what people the famous Nephilim verse. Oh God, some kind of angel came down and had sex.
Let's not even start.
Right.
Let's not even start.
The point
Because
is,
we all know, excuse me, Yaakov, if I may say, yeah. I just want to say, we all know that the Nephilim are reptilians from the planet Zeptor 11. It's not even up for discussion.
Now you joke. There's actually a rabbi online. He was reading from the Zohar, talking about Cain and Abel being part reptilian. This is actually,
you said yes, you said that.
this is actually, according to him, stated in the Zohar, which is nonsense. But anyway, the point I'm getting.
Excuse me, it's not nonsense. It's just that you're not enlightened enough. Okay, you haven't studied the Gemara enough. Okay, you'll understand it someday. All right, Yaakov.
Yeah.
Someday you'll understand it. Okay, when after you study the entire Talmud. This is what the rabbis always used to say to me when I would, point something obviously ridiculous out in the Torah. They'd always say to me, how much Gemara have you studied exactly? Oh, I did fall asleep in Rabbi, I won't even mention his name, such and such class in Mahom Meir, so I guess I studied some Talmud. Well, when you study the entire Talmud and all the Rishonim and all the Achronim and all of the Zohar, then come back to me and we'll talk. Okay, because now you know absolutely nothing. So I guess that after I do that, then I will realize that Cain and Abel were actually reptilians. I'm just not at that level at this point.
Yeah, well, the point I was getting at, I reject the entire idea that it was angels involved with producing hybrid offspring. For me, it's clear that it was the two lines beginning to mix, the line of Seth and the line of Cain. And it was because the godly line of Seth started to intermarry into this ungodly line of Cain that the world lost its defense against violence, because all the good people are now going over to these hot women that were the daughters of the line of Cain. And so that's why
so you think the Nephilim represents...
Well, the Nephilim, a lot of people want to say it's giants, but that's not actually the case. The word Nephal, the verb Nephal, has various meanings. One, it could mean to fall from one place to another, from someplace high to low, or whatever. Okay. Sure. Then it can mean to die, because when you talk about someone who fell in battle, it means he died in battle. Okay. Then it can mean that someone actually defected. We see this in the story of the king. Who was that? I want to say it was Hezekiah, maybe not, might be wrong, but one of the kings of Israel was at war with the Aramean kings, and it says that there were so many thousands of the Israelites who fell to the king of Aram, and it's not talking about that they died. It is talking about they defected. They went over to that side because they saw how strong his army was. And so they defected. Now, one thing I like to point out in the verse that is talking about that, it says, in those days were the Nephilim, those which were basically, it literally means fallen. Or it could, like I said, be defected, the defectors, who were from old men of God. They used the word Anashe Hashem. And of course, you have a clause Anshe Shame, which is usually used for famous people. But when you have the Anshe Hashem, the only time normally that you use Hashem in the Torah was in reference to God Himself. And so what it's talking about was the men who were from of old, men of God, they fell to these godly women, these ungodly women, and the world became corrupted and full of violence because of it, because the godly line now has become completely corrupted. And that's what I'm talking about here. It says, and it's because of them that the earth has become filled with this outrage or violence or whatever we want to call it.
All right, it's an interesting concept. I mean, I don't know if I've ever been able to make sense of that verse. I don't have the verses in front of me right now, but excuse me. But I think the Nephilim are related directly. Aren't the Nephilim the same as the Anakim, or is that just kind of extrapolation?
They say that.
Doesn't it say it explicitly? Doesn't it say that in the days that the Anakim were in the land or something like that? It's related directly to the Nephilim, but I don't remember.
The Anakim, look, we have hyperbole in the Tanakh, okay? Not everything that's ever said is meant to be taken at face value literally. For instance, we read in the Torah about the spies who went into the land of Canaan and came back and reported about these giant people. Oh, they were giant people. Now, there's no doubt these people were probably a lot taller or bigger or whatever than the...
well, we get an actual measurement. It speaks about the size of Og's bed, specifically.
Yeah. Well, the bed is...
It says it. Thing. Exactly.
Yeah, I understand.
Right.
But just
well, he was one of the Anakim, so we know exactly how big... Yeah.
We only know how big his bed was. We don't know how big he was. But there is actually a measurement of Goliath, I think, that he was like 13 cubits or something like that. So he was a pretty tall dude.
No, not 13 cubits.
Maybe 8 or 9.
Okay, maybe. No.
Anyway, the point is that there was probably no doubt that these guys were pretty tall people. Okay, we have giantism that is around even today. And now, maybe not quite on that level, but the point I'm getting at is these guys went in and they said, look, the cities had walls that were fortified all the way up to the heavens. Okay? There are no cities that had walls reaching into the heavens, as most people think.
Sure, it's an expression. Obviously.
Right, and that's all I'm getting at. And so it's made clear that these men were Gibborim. Right? The Gibborim were warlords. Okay?
Right.
A Gibbor is a man of war. And it says, and they were from of old, and it's Hashem. And the way I look at it is it's talking about men of God. At former times, they were men of God. They went over to this other side. And the world, because of their action, the world went completely corrupt. And that's why only Noah and his son, actually Noah himself was the only one who remained righteous and perfect. His sons and their wives, and of course Noah's wives, escaped only because Noah was a righteous man.
Mm-hmm. All right. I'm
Anyway,
curious to see what. Let's see. The Nephilim verse is in Genesis chapter 5. I'm going to say. No. Where is it?
It's in chapter 6.
6. Okay. Let me look. Let me just. I'm just curious for my own edification. What? Oh shoot! How did this happen? Let's see exactly what Robert Alter has to say here. So chapter 6.
Mm-hmm.
And what? It's chapter 6. Which verse?
Hang on, I'll tell you.
Here it is. Here it is.
Yes, verse 4.
Okay, verse 4. So this is what Robert Alter says. Nephilim, the only obvious meaning of the Hebrew term is fallen ones, perhaps those who have come down from the realm of the gods. But then the word might conceivably reflect an entirely different un-Hebraic background. In any case, the notion of semi-divine, heroic figures in numbers, the Nephilim are thought of as giants who are offspring of miscegenation between gods and women, again touches on common ground with Greek and other mythologies. That's all he says.
Yeah, when you read the histories in hang on, somebody.
Actually, he does say more. Mm-hmm. Here he says, "Come to bed," where they slept with, or they came to. The Hebrew idiom is literally "come into," that is, entered. It involves a more direct reference to the mechanics of the sexual act than to know, and thus has a more carnal coloration. But at the same time, it seems to be perfectly decorous. The English "entered" would be too clinical, and in any case, the Hebrew idiom refers to the whole act of intercourse, not merely to penetration. Of the three expressions used for sexual intercourse in Genesis, the other two are to know and to lie with. This one is reserved for sexual intimacy with a woman with whom the man has not previously had carnal relations, whether or not she is his legitimate wife. The spatial imagery of the idiom of coming into appears to envisage entering concentric circles, the woman's private sphere, her bed, her body. Okay, that's not exactly relevant. Interesting nonetheless. Heroes of yore. So this is I think where it says Giborim. The Hebrew style of this entire clause reflects a certain epic heightening, hence the archaizing turn in the translation. One suspects that these words are either a citation of an old heroic poem or a stylistic allusion to an epic genre. Okay, anyway.
Yeah,
really
in the Greek history, when you read about what's called the gigantes. Now, the word gigantes is where you get the word giant from. It's a Greek word, and gigantes just comes from two words: "gay," which means earth, and genetes, which means to be born. So basically, they were earthborn, or has later some Roman commentators came to say they were the offsprings of Gaia. However, when you read the earliest of the gigantes, they were basically warlike people. They weren't descendants of the gods, and they weren't really of that great stature. They were like normal people, other than their warlike nature. In fact, I wrote an article for college about it, and I'll send you the actual comment in the book and all like that, where you can actually read it. But the older you go into the history of the giant, they were just normal people like me and you, but they were really, really violent people. And it says that they waged war on all of the neighbors all around them. And that's what we're seeing here. And now the Septuagint uses gigantes instead of Nephilim. Okay, it says that the gigantes was in the land of those days. And so they're relating this idea of the Nephilim to the giants. But I don't think that's what it's talking about at all. In fact, it tells you at the very end of the verse, Hema Hagiborim Asher Me'olam Anashe Hashem. And however you want to say it, men of old who were from they were the Gibborim, all right, which were warlords. These were
Right.
warriors who were from
Right.
ancient times, May Olam, from times before.
Right.
Yeah, I think somebody's washing dishes.
Well,
Maybe.
they were warriors because they were so big. I think is the implication. They were huge, so they were warriors, just like Shimshon
Well, the next person is
in the Book of
Gibbor.
Judges.
Is the next one mentioned is Nimron,
Mm-hmm.
as they but there is no place anywhere that talks about angelic beings coming down and having sexual relations with humans and producing a hydra. That's basically.
Well, we don't know. We don't know. We don't know. I don't know. If you could be referring to that, it could be. I personally think that that's precisely what it's referring to, as crazy as it sounds, because it seems to me that actually I think Robert Alter references a place in the Book of Numbers. If you, I don't know how sidetracked you want to get now, but I guess we could go check that out. But it seems to me that what it's talking about is, some kind of angels coming down and having relations with women on planet Earth and creating these angels / or God, divine beings / human hybrids, which because they were half human, half angel, were huge were huge, were large, and that's simple reading to me. That's the simple reading if you ask me. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't buy it.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense. I don't either, honestly. But I mean, I don't not buy it, but I don't buy it. It's an explanation.
Oh,
But it is the simplest reading.
Yeah, no, not really, because the only way you could even interject angels in it is because of the phrase B'nai Elohim. But that in itself doesn't necessarily mean that they were angelic beings. B'nai Elohim are also human beings. All right, and we see that in Deuteronomy, I think chapter 14 or 7 or something like that, where it says, "You are all the sons of Adonai, your God." And so the way I look at it is when it talks about the B'nai Elohim, these are the actual faithful line of Seth who remained faithful. Whereas the earthly,
It's an interesting.
the verse Nephilim, in my opinion, goes all the way back to the. There's only two places before this that the word is even used. One is in the story of the sleep that fell upon Adam, and the second one was in the countenance of it says "Lema nafilu paneka," why is your
Of kind, yeah.
And then we have the Nephilim directly after we're told about the people of Cain committing murders, beginning to make instruments of pleasure, taking possession of certain things, and utilizing iron. It says they would sharpen or hone iron. Now we come to the story of the world being filled with violence because of it. But anyway, that's up to the individual. They can think whatever they want.
Let's not get bogged down, right?
Yeah.
I've never been able to understand the verse, so
it was because of this action above, whatever you want to say it was. That's where you get the key.
Yeah.
So
okay, next verse.
Yeah, so I got a couple questions here in the comments. Somebody says, "Quit dishes too loud."
I knew somebody was going to say that. I knew somebody was going to say that, and I was actually going to relate to it before. I knew somebody was going to say that, and I was actually going to relate to it. I don't see doing. First of all, for me, washing dishes is extremely relaxing. I love doing it, but I don't wash all the dishes on Shabbat. But what I most are put aside for Motzi Shabbat. But if there are a couple of dishes that just need a very light washing, I will tend to do them on Shabbat. And I don't really consider that melacha, A, because it's a very small amount, and B, because it's relaxing to me. So I'm not sitting here washing dishes for an hour. As you notice, I'm kind of like talking, washing a couple of dishes on the side, cleaning the table. So I don't want to get sidetracked onto melacha, but it completely fits into my idea of what melacha is and what melacha is not. Okay. Yes, if I were to sit for the next 5 hours, and if I worked at a restaurant, were to go to the restaurant now and sit the next 5 hours scrubbing, like caked on, cheese off of the bottom of a pot, that would be melacha. Okay. But as I always say, there's certain things that must be done on Shabbat. Okay. If you eat 3 meals on Shabbat, okay, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, you're going to have to clean the table after breakfast and lunch, right? Unless you have 3 separate tables. What?
That's why we have the.
Well, maybe right. There might be actually something to that, as a matter of fact. But I don't want to even go there right now. But unless you have 3, no, really, there might be something to it, because a goy who is not part of your household permanently is actually allowed to work on the Shabbat. So, anyway, the point is that unless you have 3 separate tables, you're going to have to clear your table after you eat breakfast, right? That means you're going to have to take some plates, at least put them in the sink, wipe off the table a little bit, so your whatever you ate for breakfast doesn't get stuck there and it's disgusting for lunch. We all have to do a little bit of melacha on Shabbat. So this idea of doing no melacha is just ridiculous, okay? We have to go to the bathroom, okay? That's melacha, okay? I won't get into the gory details, but that involves, melacha. Flushing the toilet is melacha. I mean, unless you don't flush the toilet during Shabbat, I mean, you have to, open, maybe you have a heavy door that you have to open to get out of your house. That's melacha. So we all have to do a little bit of melacha. So this idea of doing absolutely nothing on the Shabbat is a ridiculous idea, okay? So as I've always said for years now, the idea on Shabbat is you do the minimum required amount of work on Shabbat. Everything should be prepared in advance as much as possible, leaving you as little as possible that you must do on the Shabbat. And that's the idea of melacha. So for me, I had the table had to be cleared. We ate breakfast, and then I because of the time constraints, usually right after breakfast, and I have to, then that's when the thing starts. So the table has to be cleared, okay? I'm not going to leave it until 5 in the afternoon. It happened to have been cleared on camera. And then I have about, here, let's say, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 dishes, which are not dirty enough to warrant throwing in the, putting them aside until after Shabbat, because it only takes a second to clean them, and it's relaxing to me. So I'm doing them while I'm talking, and that I think is shall we say, a balanced approach towards the idea of melacha on Shabbat. I'm not about to go outside and fix the fence and trim the trees and start like dragging like heavy bricks across 3 blocks to get them into the yard because I have to build something tomorrow or whatever. But to wash a couple of dishes. Let me let the cat out. Goodbye. To wash a couple of dishes after a meal that just require a very slight washing, in my opinion, fits into that category of let's say required or necessary work on Shabbat, because it's just a small amount of work, and it's kind of needs to be done. So anyway, but I am done washing the dishes, so I will stop before I'm given the death penalty. Anyway.
Okay. So a couple comments here from the audience. I think we covered one. He was asking how will we translate the passage of Genesis 6:4 and the Nephilim. Of course, he put up the definition from where is that from? Gesenius or maybe the BDB, or I don't know where he got this from. But the idea here is the word Nephil is actually a passive participle. It's used as a noun, and it's usually of the idea of a person being in that condition or that state.
Right. That's right. That's right. Yeah.
And so when you look at the noun form, you have nephalim, and that works because of the original vowel on the noon would have been a commas. Anyway, so you have nephew and not nephew. So hopefully that was that. And where are we again? Yara Elohim, Yomer Elohim Noah. I say, okay, let me get this up here. So here's the next bit. I say lecha teivat I say gofer kenim I say et hateva وخفرت אותה מבית ומחוץ בחופר.
Right.
And so make for yourself a box, a teva, a box of gopher wood. You shall make the box with rooms. Okay.
Yep.
And you shall cover it from inside and from out with kofir. Kofir is what they call pitch. Now, there's been a lot of comments.
Just means covering.
Yeah, a covering. It's kofir. Anything you want. Now, there's been a lot of comment on the word gopher. What is a gopher wood? And I like to explain it this way. There's a semantic relation between gafar and kafar. Okay, both mean to cover. And when we look at it, we actually still use the word kafar in Arabic, even today. When you ask God to forgive you, you say, Allahumma ghfirli. Oh God, forgive me. Ighfirli means to cover me, literally. And so the ghafar in Arabic would mean to cover my sin. Okay? However, when you talk about covering or
where do you think the word? Where do you think?
I didn't hear anything you said. You're breaking up.
Oh, shoot. I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't hear you, Mel. You broke up.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it looks like it's breaking up. I said, where do you think the word Yom HaKippurim comes from? It's from the same root.
Well, it's from a similar root. There's a different word. It's kafar. Kafar means to cover. And for instance, the point I was getting at, you have both words in Arabic, whereas normally the verb gafar we don't see very often, if at all, in the Hebrew text. But it comes from an earlier Semitic root, which means to cover. It means it's basically the same thing. And I was just explaining how they use it in Arabic is they use the verb gafar. In fact, Yom Kippur in Arabic is called Yom Gurfan. Okay, it uses the gafar instead of the kafar. Because the word kafar, the verb kafar in Arabic means to hide or conceal truth, which is where you get the idea of, that's right, kafir. So when you say atse gofer, it's just meaning covered wood. Now we see later we have something called bitumen, which is called where is it? I can't remember what it's called in Hebrew, but anyway, then you have also sulfur. I think it's called gofrit, or maybe that's bitumen.
In modern Hebrew, sulfur is gofrit. Yeah.
Gofrit. Yeah, okay.
And I think also it speaks about gofrit. Gofrit is what rains down on Sodom and Gomorrah. Gofrit.
And so
Yaakov, I can hear you. I don't know if it's on my side or on your side, but I'm having a lot of trouble hearing you all of a sudden.
Okay, how about now? Better?
Yeah, but it's kind of breaking up. It might be something on my side here, because the internet here is a little bit iffy at times. But
but anyway, the point is, it's talking about covered wood. Now, he's building a box, and it's evidently going to be a boat to survive a flood. And so basically, he's taking coated wood He's not going to have wood that's going to be on the water for a year to become waterlogged and sink. Okay, he's going to be holding a lot of weight. So you want to have wood that's going to be covered with something that would waterproof it to keep it from becoming waterlogged, because it's going to be on water for a year. Okay, and then it's then you have the command after it's constructed, after you put it all together, then you do the same thing. You cover it inside and out with a covering, which is talking about the same process of coating the wood so that it wouldn't become waterlogged.
Yaakov, I don't know. You're breaking up, and I'm just wondering if it's something on my side or if it's something on your side. Yeah, because it's a lot of trouble hearing you. So maybe you can ask the people. Maybe we can ask the people who are listening if they hear you breaking up as well, because it's coming in like staticky and broken up. And if so, then we'll know maybe something you have to correct there. If not, then I can assume it's my internet. So
yeah, can someone write?
Whoever's listening, do you hear Yaakov also breaking up as he speaks?
If you can hear me.
It's a really difficult.
Yeah. They said they can hear me fine. So it must be on your side.
Fine, without any breaking up at all?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah. Yeah, you're breaking up really bad. Now I can't hear you at all, Melech.
But it usually doesn't manifest itself in that way, but
yeah, that's technology for you. It's just one of those things we'll have to deal with. So the next verse is وَزَيْ أَشَرْ تَعَسَيْ أُثَى شَلُوش مِئَوْث أَمَّا أُرِخ هَتِبَا خَمِشِيم أَمَّا رَحْبَا وَشَلُوشِيم أَمَّا قَمَثَا. Yeah, I can hear you again. Yeah, okay. So he'll come back. Boost mobile service. I don't know what Boost mobile service is. Anyway, so it says وَزَيْ أَشَرْ تَعَسَيْ أُثَى شَلُوش مِئَوْث أَمَّا أُرِخ هَتِبَا خَمِشِيم أَمَّا رَحْبَا وَشَلُوشِيم أَمَّا قَمَثَا. And so shall you make it 300 cubits. It's the length of the box. 50 cubits. Its width, and 30 cubits its height. So it's going to be 300 cubits long, 50 cubits wide, and 30 cubits high. So we'll wait for Melech to come back. صوحار تعسي لتيبا وإلى أما تكلنا من المعلى وفاتح تيبا بسدات تسيم تحتيم شنيم والشلشيم تعسيها. And Sohar is a window. Okay, we got some more comments here. Where are we at? We are in chapter 6, and we're at verse 16. So I have the verse posted. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. So it says, and you shall make a window for the box, and you shall complete it to a cubit from above, which means it's going to be 30 cubits, and then the window is going to add another cubit to it. Okay. And a door, or the door of the box, you shall set in its side, besidda, in its side. Tahtim shanim ushalashim ta'aseh. And you shall make 2 and 3 lower decks. So you'll have basically 3 levels inside. So it looks like Melech is having some trouble joining us. Okay, so verse 17. وأني هنني مبي اتحمبول مايم على الأرض لشحيت كل بصار أشر بو روح حيم متاحت الشمايم كل أشر بأرض يقوى. As for me, look, I am bringing the floods, Hamabul, and now we have basically an explanation what a flood is, because up until this point, no one has ever seen one. So here's Melech. So no one has actually seen a flood. So now we have Mayim al Haaretz, which means waters upon the earth, which is what the Mabul is. To destroy all flesh, which has the Ruach Hayim, the spirit of life, or the breath of life, from under the heavens or the skies. Cool, or everything which is in the earth. Yigwa, which usually means to die, but it's talking about to expire. That come to an end. Yeah.
I tested my internet connection and it's fine. I'm pretty sure it's on your side. So again, if you can ask the people if they're having trouble hearing you, it's coming in very strange here.
Yeah, I hear you strange as well.
Right.
So if anyone is still in the audience, can you let me know how the sound is again? Who's having the problems here? Might be me. Yep. Maybe we've lost the audience. Yeah, well, maybe it'll work out. Yeah, again, here's what I get in the messages.
Yeah.
So
okay. All right, then it must be on my side. I don't know how.
Yeah. So look, I'm going to take a short break. I've been at it for about an hour and a half. So
right.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm just going to basically cut my mic and my video, but I'll be right back. So if you want to continue, I just read 17. So okay, I'll be right back.
Just read 17. Yep, sounds good. All right then. Okay, so let's see what we have here. I'm just going to bring this up here for 1 second. Let me see here. All right, I'm going to cut that out. Pause it. Let's see how I pause it. Okay, so we have ואני הנני מביא את מבול מים על הארץ לשחט כל בשר אשר בו רוח חיים מתחת השמיים כל אשר בארץ יגווע. Again, we see לשחט כל בשר, to destroy. That's the same verb we saw before with the earth had become corrupt. Nishchat, aretz nishchata, and when God was going to destroy. So now it's in a slightly different form. This is in the PDF form.
which is I like to call the intensive. It kind of or the transitive. It's often transitive verb, which means it takes a direct object, but it's underlying root. Everything that is in the earth will die. Will basically waste away. So, okay. So that was verse 17. I just want to look something up here. I just want to look up the word Mabul. Because it's interesting here, Mabul is usually translated as flood. But here it says Mabul Mayim. So Mabul usually implies, Mabul Mayim means a flood of water. But at least in modern Hebrew, when you speak about a Mabul, it already implies water. So now that you saw this, that it just occurred to me that I should look up the background of the word Mabul. It says it's of uncertain derivation. Derivation dubious. Also the old Assyrian loanword, get from unknown Assyrian, on and on and on. Always answer the article. Genesis, and it really occurs only in relation to the flood. Let's see where else it occurs. So it's in Genesis. Then it's in Psalms 29:10. Let's take a look at that for just out of curiosity. One second here. Yeah, Genesis, Psalms 29:10. And Psalms 29:10 says, "Yehovah lemabul yishav, v'yeshev Yehovah Melech leolam." So, and the translation is, I'll just read it. There to the flood of, let's bring up the entire Psalm to get some context here.
Okay, I'm back.
And 9, Kol Yehovah Yicholel Ayalot Yasaf Ya'arot V'hechalo Kulo Omer Kavod. That's famous. Yehovah Lemabul Yashav Yeshed Yehovah Melech Leolam Yehovah Oz Le'amo Yitin Yehovah Yivarech Et Amo B'Shalom. That's Psalms 29. I just read verses 9 through 11. So it's referring to Yehovah Lemabul Yashav. Yehovah sat over the flood, basically reigned over the flood, right? Sit often means like sitting on the throne. So he reigned over the period of the flood. So okay, so Mabul is, the meaning of Mabul is flood, and here it says Mabul Mayim, a flood of water. Okay.
Melech, your sound went completely out.
Bad connection.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm back.
I really don't know what to do.
It's okay. I'll keep reading and commenting. Where are we at now? So I'm just going to assume we are in verse 18.
Yaakov, I'm going to try to reset the router. So go ahead, and I'll try to come back as soon as I can. Okay. All right then.
No problem.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, let me. Hadn't heard anything since 17. Okay, well, I'll read again 17,
Mm-hmm.
and I'll post 17 again.
Can you hear me okay now, by the way?
I hear you fine now.
Okay, now I'm on the cell phone service, so maybe I'll just stay on that for a little while. Okay. Too bad, because I had a lot of it. I just, if I could just recap,
Go
what I
right
wanted
ahead.
to say about, and let me know if you can't hear me all of a sudden. But I was talking about verse 17 and the word mabul. And this word mabul really appears only in Genesis with relation to the flood. And then the only other place it appears is, if I can bring it up here, is in Psalms, Psalm number 29, verse 10. And I'll just read the couple of verses there. You can hear me okay now, by the way?
Yeah, I hear you fine still.
Okay. Kol Yehovah Yecholel Ayalot. Let me just keep it this way. Kol Yehovah Yecholel Ayalot. So the voice of Yehovah will cause the Ayalot. How do you say that again in English? I can't even remember the word in English. But anyway, let's do English translation here. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Verse 10. Yehovah lemabul yashav yeshev v'yeshev Yehovah melech leolam. Yehovah sat over the flood. Yeshev Yehovah melech leolam, and Yehovah will sit as king forever. And so the idea here is that in verse 10, this is Psalm 29, verse 10, that Yehovah reigned over the flood. He was the king, at the time of the flood, or he reigned over the doing of the flood. So really, the only time Mabul is used in the Tanakh, and this is the main point I wanted to make, is in relation to this actual flood of Noah. There's nowhere else that it's used, and the only other reference is in Psalm 29, verse 10, and that's actually relating right back to this flood.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
all.
interesting. The psalm talking about God setting, he set upon the flood, or however it says it there. Yeah, everyone says it sounds good, but I think we just lost Melech again.
Oh, shoot.
But no, I hear you again. But anyway,
Okay.
what I wanted to say is, what's interesting is we have a comment in the Quran, of all places, talking about the throne of God, and it says that God set His throne upon the primordial waters of the earth, because it talks about He made the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and then He set His throne upon the waters. But it's pretty interesting. Not that it means anything. I'm just saying, as we read that verse in Psalm, I kind of thought about that. But yeah, so now we're on verse 18. So وحكموثي أسبريثي إتاخ وبثا إلهتبا أتا وبنيخا وإشتخا ونشيبنيخا إتاخ. And I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into, or you shall enter the box, or the what they call the ark. You and your sons, your wife, and the wives of your sons with you. Now you'll see that itach is in the feminine, but the reason, and that's at the athnachta itach, and as well as the siluk at the end of the verse itach. And the only reason you have it that way is because they're both in pause. And so when you have the pause instead of ittecha, which is what it should be, with you, the vocal shiva will lengthen.
Yep, and I'd like to point out a couple of things about this verse. Again, sound check. You can hear me okay, Yaakov?
So far, so good.
Okay, good. So, so Yehovah is now making a covenant with Noah, and it's very rare for Yehovah to make a covenant with somebody. He makes a covenant with Abraham. He makes a covenant with David, the house of David. He makes a covenant with the children of Israel. That's basically what the Torah is. to make a covenant here, he also makes one with Noah. That's not a thing that Yehovah very often does, and so it's important to point out when we do see that word. Now, after the flood is over, we're going to see another covenant that he makes, and that's perhaps the fulfillment of this covenant that's being spoken about here, which has to do with the rainbow. He makes a covenant that he will not bring he will not destroy the earth through flood in the future. So just keep it out, and when we get to that, just remember this this idea of covenant, or this word covenant that appears here in chapter 18. The other thing I wanted to point out, oh yes, I wanted to ask you, Yaakov, if you remember the person who gave me the idea to keep an eye out for these covenants that are made throughout the Tanakh was a guy named. Do you remember this remember this guy Brit Shalom?
Brit Shalom, yeah, he was
from the Paltalk days.
Yeah, I remember him. I think he was a Messianic Christian, but he was a really interesting guy.
Was he Messianic?
I
didn't think he was.
Yeah,
he was really interesting. Christian. That I didn't know.
And that's, I think, why he ended up leaving the discussion, which is a shame. I like discussing the Torah. I don't care who it is, whether you're a Christian, a Jew, a Buddhist, a Muslim. I don't care. If you want to discuss the Torah, let's discuss it. And the guy made, he did some studies. They were really fascinating studies.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I don't care that he was a Christian or not. He brought up some really valid points from the Torah. And I really enjoyed his studies. But they harassed him once it came out that he was a Messianic Christian. Everyone harassed him so much, so finally he left and never came back.
Really, I didn't know that. Okay. At any rate, his name, or the name that he went by, was Brit Shalom, right? Yeah. And so he was very into this idea of covenants. That's why he called himself Brit Shalom, covenant of peace, right? And he did a number of studies where he would go through the various covenants that are made in the Tanakh and point them out, and point out the importance of this idea of a covenant, of a brit, right? So it's, whenever you see the word brit, whenever you see the word covenant, it's something that you should pay attention to. Anyway,
yeah, and he always made a point of explaining the word chesed. Chesed, in relation to a brit, is that someone's going to be faithful to this agreement that was reached, regardless of whether you're actually faithful or not. And that's why it always says that God keeps chesed with his covenant. And I always thought it was pretty interesting. Okay, verse 19. Oh, let me post it so that everyone can see. I hope everyone's seeing these verses. This is the first time I've tried this. I'm still getting used to all this.
It's great. Here. It works great. Yeah.
Umekul hachai mekul basar shenayim mekul tavi il hateva lihayov itach zachar necheva yihyu, and of all that is living. High is here the living, from all flesh, to shenayim, which I guess would mean by twos, of all, or two of all, shall come. You shall bring into the ark. Lechayot means to basically to extend the life. To allow them to live with you, male and female they shall be. And this is one thing too that a lot of I have a pet peeve with what's called the documentary hypothesis.
I was just going to bring up the documentary hypothesis. Go ahead.
Because
you're probably going to make exactly the same point. Yeah,
they say that this is a retelling of that we're about to see, where it says, says 2 by 2, they'll come to you, and then it says because it doesn't actually say 2 pair. It doesn't say 2 pair at all. It just says 2 shall come to you. And then it says later, we'll read in just a few verses where it says, of the clean birds and the clean animals, 7 will come.
That's right.
And the reason why is these animals after the flood, those will be used on the sacrificial altar. And so you would have to have some that would be kept alive and some for the sacrifice later that we'll see. And also, Noah is told to take of everything that is used for food. Now, unless you consider that all animals prior to the flood were also vegetarian, then he would have to have food also for the animals who were not vegetarian. If there happened to be meat-eating animals or insects.
Yes, but meat-eating animals would not have to eat clean animals. They can eat whatever.
No, not necessarily. But it. I'm just saying.
Animals don't have to keep kosher.
Having 7. Yeah, no. And that idea wasn't going to be what we call kosher, which is not even found in the Tanakh.
Right.
But the idea of clean and unclean animals comes up later. But here, we're looking back in the narrative, and these were clean animals. And what I'm getting at is Noah probably wouldn't have had access to a year's worth of produce. Of course, he could have had a hydroponics on the ark. I'm not sure. I don't see how it would work. But he was told also to take food. And so I would presume that also some of those clean animals were eaten
Possibly,
by the family. They had to survive for a year.
Right. And you'd be surprised. Anyway. I'm not a meat eater. I'm actually vegetarian, but I do know that if you kill a large animal like a cow, the meat that you get from that cow can last you for a very, very, very long time. I'm not sure exactly how long.
Yes, but especially if they took salt to salt it, which I believe they would had no problem with salt.
Sure. Well, I just mean the volume of the meat is so large in one of those animals that it can, provide you with food for a lot of time. So it does make sense, that maybe that was the reason they put 7, and also, like you said, for the sacrifices afterwards, he'll do sacrifices afterwards, Noah.
Yeah.
I wanted to point out, yes, and I wanted to actually also make the point regarding the documentary hypothesis. I was going to make exactly the same point that you did, that those who believe in the documentary hypothesis will say that, I don't remember which was, one of the authors, and I'm sure everybody here listening knows what the documentary hypothesis is, the idea that the Torah was written by 4 different authors, the E, the J, the P, and the D, right? The Elohists, the Jehovists, the priestly writings, and then the Deuteronomists. And so they'll say that I don't know if I don't remember which one was the E and which one was the J, but let's say for the sake of argument that where it says that Noah brought 2 animals of each type onto the ark, that's the Elohists. That's one author saying that. And then later on, when it speaks about the 7 clean animals, which we'll get to in a little while, then that's the J, for instance. I don't know, or maybe the other way around. It's either going to be the E and the J or the J and the E. But that's another author that wrote that, and they're contradictory. So that's clear evidence that the Torah is not divine, that it's completely man-made, written by warring factions of authors that somehow had to meld all of these these narratives into a single book. Basically, a load of baloney.
Yep. And also when they talk, it's basically a few things that they use to try to say, oh, well, this is this style of writing, this is this style. And interesting, it was, I think, Ibn Ezra, who was the first to start making the point about, oh, well, there must be different authors because look at the different styles. But that's I find that not really the case, because when you look at the writing from Genesis to Deuteronomy, it's almost the same, okay? Of course, you have places where the covenant name of God, the Yod Heh Vav Heh, is used, and then you have other places where only Elohim is used. You have places where they're both used. That doesn't necessarily mean you'll have different writers. It's just different situations where the combinations were used in different ways. Also, the writing is very, very similar. Whenever you look, and also in Joshua, when you read a lot of Joshua's work, it is similar to what's written in the Torah, which is why they include Joshua amongst the D source. But when you look in like the book of the Judges, and from there you begin to read forward, the style of writing is different. Is in places where you would see one word used in the Torah, is a completely different word used for that in the book of the Judges in later books. And so that's how you can judge that those were definitely different people with different uses, different phraseology, different syntax. Is completely different. But from Genesis to the end of Joshua, they're almost identical. And so that's why I say it's all bunk.
And furthermore, a lot of the so-called contradictions between the different sources are not contradictions at all. They usually have pretty straightforward explanations, except that you have to understand biblical Hebrew to really understand explanations, and to understand that the Torah, the Tanakh, and biblical Hebrew work differently from a modern language. That you can have things that seem like contradictions, which are really embellishments, or which are really looking at the same situation from different sides or from different points of view, or adding information that wasn't there before. So I can't believe that these scholars were so stupid. It just seems to me a deliberate hit job against the Torah. Basically trying to justify the belief that, or trying to prove their already their predetermined belief that the Torah is just a bunch of baloney, is not divine. And as a former rabbi of mine used to say, throwing the bull or shooting the arrow and then drawing the bullseye around it. That was one of Rab Bar Chaim's favorite phrases. You're a big Rab Bar Chaim fan, kind of.
Yeah, and so the question here from Nicola is: are clean animals defined at the time of the flood or earlier, in your opinion? It could be argued that it was earlier, or it could be argued that it was at this moment in time. God explained the difference between what he considered clean and unclean. Personally, I think it might have been even before then. They were sacrifices being used even in the time of Cain and Abel, which is why he brought the mincha of his first fruits of the flocks and of its fats. Now later, mincha is normally used of a cereal or grain offering, but there it's pretty interesting that the mincha was of the flocks, and the idea of the bikurim and the cherev. This is specifically in a ritual setting. You offer your first fruits, and then you burn the fat upon the altar. Now, how Abel offered them to God, we don't really know. It's not really implied, but Noah, at his days, he constructed an altar. We don't see anywhere where God told him to construct the altar that I remember. So evidently the use of altars were already in vogue. They were already being used even before that time, because he decides to construct an altar and he put an olah, which is a burnt offering of that. So why would he do that? How would he even come into this? Why would that even come to his mind after the flood, if that was never done before? And so I always like to point that out. So and we'll see here in just a few minutes. God tells him to actually take of the clean animals, seven of the clean animals.
Right.
So he must have already known what.
And and if I could point out, I agree 100%. I think that the idea of clean animals harkens back to pretty much right after Adam and Hava were thrown out of the Garden of Eden. And if we do go back to Genesis 4, this is Genesis 4, verse, where is it? 2, ותוסף ללדת את אחיו, ואת הבל, ויהי הבל רועה צאן, וקין היה עובד אדמה. And so basically it says here in Genesis chapter 4, verse 2, that Hevel was a shepherd, right? Tzon doesn't is usually translated as sheep, but it just means flock animals. So it could be sheep, goats, etc.
Ram.
Rams, right. And ayalot, right. And then it says in verse 4, "Hevel hevi gam hu מבכורות צאנו מחלביהן ואישה ירואה את הבל אל מנחתו." So it says he brought the first fruits, the firstborn, actually it means the best in this case, I believe, of his no, maybe it doesn't mean the firstborn of his flocks, and from their fats, and so we see here that Hevel is sacrificing from the flocks. Okay, flock animals are all of them. By the definition of a flock animal is basically that it's basically a ruminant. It's kosher. There are no flock animals that I know of that are not ruminants. And so this idea of clean animals seems to go back to this time. Certainly, Hevel was herding what we would call clean or kosher animals, and certainly the sacrifice he brought was of a clean or kosher animal because it was a flock animal. It was one of its own. So, and so I think that it goes back to
point out.
Yeah.
I would also like to point out when we talk about the first fruit offerings, according to the Torah. Now, this doesn't necessarily have to mean this was from the very beginning that way, but this was being written from the point of view of Moses looking backwards in time. Okay, and so he would be writing, in my opinion, with the language that the people he's writing for would understand. Mm-hmm. Especially when it talks about rituals and sacrifice, because that's what they're going to be responsible for doing. Now, the first fruits of the flocks and also of the herbs was to be given to God on the 8th day. You weren't allowed to keep your first fruit of the flocks and herds longer than 7 days. They were allowed to drink the milk of its mother for 7 days. After that, you're not allowed to let them be weaned. 7 days is not enough time to wean anything. But on the 8th day, you're to bring it up, and it was to be burnt upon the altar. Okay, now the mincha, for the most part, they were also burnt on the altar. Not all the time, and not sometimes they were to take parts of it for the priest to eat. But a lot of the when we talk about the mincha, it was also burnt on the altar with the sacrifice. Now later, the mincha itself was normally a grain offering, but we see here at the time of Cain and Abel, mincha just means basically a gift. It's something that's brought, and I believe personally that altars were built and the sacrifices were made on those altars. Later, we see that, like I said, Noah already knew about at least an Olah, which is a burnt offering, and the reason why he did it was as a votive thank offering that he survived a year on in a box. But anyway, so to make a long story short, I believe that the clean animals would have been known from the very beginning.
Yep, no, I agree with that.
So, where are we? Verse Okay, so this is going to be verse 20. מהעוף למינהו ומן הבהמה למנה מכל רמס האדמה למינהו שניים מכל יבוא אליך להיות. And from the flying creatures of its kind, and from the beasts, which is the behemah is usually the four-footed beast, according to his kind, from everything.
Yeah.
Ramis ha'adama. Ramis means something that roams around of the earth, those things that roam on the land.
A creepy crawly thing, and it can include insects, but it can also include things like mice and rats and stuff like that. Rodents are referred to as romes.
According to his kind, two of everything, they shall come to you to be kept alive. Now notice it's saying that two of these shall come to him. Right? So 21. Gotta post it. وقتا קח לך מכל מאכל אשר יאכל ואספת אליך וחיה לך ולהם, that's the important part, ולהם לאוכלה. And you shall take for yourself of everything that is edible, okay, which is to be eaten, okay, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be for you and for them. For food. Yep. And that's what I was getting at, where it tells him to gather these edible things, not only for himself, but also for the animals.
But on the other hand, I would like to point out one thing there. It's possible, we know that modifying clauses are not always adjacent to the clauses that they modify. And it's possible that this is referring to here, verse 21 is actually referring back to verse 18, speaking not about the animals, not about bringing food for the animals, but about bringing food for, because in verse 18 it says, you shall bring yourself and your sons, or in your children, and your wife and the wives of your children with you, and so then it goes ahead and speaks about all of the animals, and then it says v'haya lecha ulahem laochla, that lahem may just be referring to Noah and his family, not necessarily to the animals as well, possibly. It's difficult to tell, but it is a possibility, because the modifying clauses in the Torah, the modifying clauses of something are not always adjacent to the clauses they modify. The Torah could say something and go off on a tangent, and then come back and say something else that refers not to the tangent, but to the original verse. So it would be something in English. Let's say what would be an equivalent? Be saying something like, oh, I don't know, I'm looking at a fan right now. Oh, I just bought a fan. I went to the store. And on the way to the store, I stopped off and I got some groceries, and the groceries I got were water and butter and juice, and it works very well, and I like it very much. And the phrase "and it works very well and I like it very much" from the context there would be referring back to the fan, not to the juice and the butter and the water. But that's the way the Torah often says things. The modifying clause, in that case, it works very well and I like it very much, is not necessarily adjacent to the clause which it's modifying, which in this case would be I bought a fan. So just to point that out.
Okay, so you're saying that the food is not for the animals, is for...
Lahem may be referring just to the human beings, possibly.
Okay, so what did the animals eat for the year that they were on the ark?
Who knows? Whatever they ate, but the Torah does not necessarily have to mention that. The Torah doesn't mention every little thing, right? So the important thing is usually the human beings, okay? And lahem. 1 second here. I'm just gonna want to see one thing. כל החי, וכל בשר שניים, it's indeterminate, is what I'm saying. It could be referring to the animals as well, but I'm saying it's not necessarily referring to the animals. It could be hearkening back just to Noah and his family.
Okay.
And whatever the animals ate, that would be secondary, because the animals are not important, right? And not in this narrative of the story. Obviously, they would have to be kept alive, right? The commandments, right, to keep them alive. So they would have to be kept alive, and so therefore, in order to be kept alive, they obviously need food. But in terms of the narrative of the story, when it speaks about bringing food, it might just be assuming, well, food is also going to be brought to the animals. But the main thread, the sir hamerkazi, as we would say in modern Hebrew, the main thread of the story here is about the human beings, not about the animals. Just possible.
Okay.
I'm just curious. I doubt Robert Alter would say so. You can go on. I'm just going to look for myself and Robert Alter, and he happens to say anything. But go ahead.
So verse 22, وَيَعَسْ نُوحٍ كَكُلْ أَشْرَ سِوَاءُ أُطَوَّ Elohim كَيْنَ عَسَى. And so Noah did according to all that Elohim commanded him, and so he did. So was done.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the end of the first Aliyah.
Mm-hmm. Which we did in 2 hours. So let's see, 7 aliyahs. So that would take us only 14 hours.
I don't think we'll keep an audience for 14 hours.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so the beginning of the second Aliyah is in chapter 7.
Yeah.
وَيَوْمَرْ أَذُنَا لِنُوحٍ بَوْ أَتَى وَخُلْ بَيْتَخَا إِلْهَ التِّبَى كِي أُوثَخَا رَئِيثِ صَدِيقٍ لِفَنَاي بَدُور هَزَيْ. And so Adonai says to Noah, enter you and all of your house into the box. Teva. It's interesting, this word Teva. Teva is what was used for, of course, the box that carried humanity. Here in the story of Noah, is also used in the box that Yocheved put Moses in and set him on the bank of the river, not in the water. And also it's used for when you say a word, like the word normally you see in the Tanakh, a word is either devar or it's mila. But today in grammar you say teva. means a word. Anyway, interesting.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. I was just thinking of something else.
Yeah. And
that's why I didn't respond.
So Adonai says, Noah, enter you and all of your house into the box, because it is you, Othacha, it is you I have seen, Sadiq, in my presence, which means righteous before me, in this generation, the Dor Hazeh. And now we have the singular, the definite singular. Oh, I forgot to post that. Here we go. Like I said, I'm not very computer literate. I have to copy paste all this.
And it's interesting, we were speaking earlier about that he was a tzaddik b'dorotav, and we wondered what it meant, dorotav. That was in chapter 6, verse, what is it?
Mm-hmm. 6:9.
6:9, right? Noach ish tzaddik tamim haya b'dorotav, and we wondered what does it mean dorotav, and here, and my understanding was that it just basically means the abstract idea of a generation. And here we have in verse 7, it doesn't use the plural dorotav. Now here it uses the plural dor, the singular, right?
Mm-hmm.
אותך ראיתי צדיק לפני בדור הזה, in this generation, which backs up the idea that it was just kind of an abstract. It wasn't speaking about multiple generations, but it was using the plurals, and that's what's called the abstract plural in biblical Hebrew. That sometimes the plural is used as to talk about a general idea of a generation in this case. Anywho, all right.
So verse 2. מכל הבהמה התורה תיקח לך 7 איש ואשתו, ומן הבהמה אשר לא טהורה היא 2 איש ואשתו. And of everything, the clean beast you shall take for you 7, which is normally called 7 pair. A man and his wife, or male and female.
Right, not his wife. Come on, honey. Woo! Gotta get on.
They gotta get married too. This is yeah, right. You have to marry.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
And of the beasts that are not pure or clean, and the word tahor doesn't necessarily mean without dirt or without being cleanly washed or something like that. Tahor is a ritual, cleanliness.
It's clean. You could put it as clean in the eyes of God. Let's put it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you shall take 2 of those, a male and female, a man and his wife.
So one pair as opposed to 7 pair.
And you copy paste this next verse.
So I have a question for you. Maybe this is a good time to bring it up, Yaakov.
Okay.
So, what is your opinion regarding the historicity of the story of the flood? Because they just don't make sense, right? So let's point out a couple of things that don't make sense. I mean, there's so many of them. In fact, I recently just joined a group on Facebook. I can't remember the exact name, but it basically had to do with it's a debate over whether the flood story is real or not. Okay, so the size of the ark. If you work out the size of the ark, it's about the size of I did it a while ago. It's the size of a football field approximately.
Yeah, they recreated it in where is that, in Tennessee?
Something like that. Yeah, Kentucky, Tennessee, something like that. Yeah. And so it's huge, right? Yeah. So I mean, can you imagine just Noah and his family just building this huge thing? I mean, and now think about it. Okay, now think about if you were a zookeeper, if you ran a zoo. I don't know, let's say the Jerusalem Zoo, okay, which I've been to, which has it's a large zoo, right? You basically have to upkeep a bunch of different types of animals. They all have their needs. And they all have to be fed, and they have to be cared for, and they need their exercise and all that kind of stuff. So now we're not just talking about a zoo, which let's say the Jerusalem Zoo has, 500 animals. I don't know, some elephants, some lions, some tigers, whatever it has. This ark is supposed to have every single species on planet Earth, or at least every single species in the Middle East, right? In the area there. Just imagine. I mean, to run a zoo. You need tons of money, tons of logistics, tons of zookeepers, cages have to be cleaned, food has to be, I mean, how many different, it doesn't make any sense, to be quite honest.
I've thought about it, and there are several issues. Now, I'm not going to say it's impossible. We don't know what kind of animals exactly were taken on the ark. We do know that it said you should take whatever it is of its kind, of its species. So that doesn't necessarily mean you have to take every single kind of animal that even exists, because within a species you have lots of different sub branches of the same species. For instance, I'm a nut when it comes to genetic research, and I find it pretty interesting. But one thing we know is that all the canine species that live today would have come from something that would be related to what we would think of as the modern wolf. We know that genetically because the wolf has the genetics for almost every other animal type of dog that exists today. Whereas those various dogs don't have all of the genetics related to the wolf. They all have one specific part. And so how what's called phylogeny works, this is where you get the sub branches of the different animals, is that as the animal has children and they have children and so forth, they start to spread out and go off and have their own children. Then the genetics change. You only share certain genes, and over time those genes begin to be lost. They don't repopulate. And that's where the different races of the species comes in. For instance, we do it in modern days when we work at dog breeding. When you take one dog, you look at the phylogeny, which is the characteristics, the traits. You want a certain trait to keep. You separate that one and allow it to breed further, and everything else you either kill or put away. And the next generation, you do the same thing. You look for only those animals that have those characteristics, and eventually you breed those other genes out. They don't have it anymore. That's why you can take a wolf and do selective breeding and end up with a Chihuahua, but you can't take a Chihuahua and do selective breeding to come up with a wolf.
But I'm gonna cut you short because I don't want to get into it because otherwise we'll get into a whole long thing about genetics and it can go on for hours. Okay, whatever the case is, there would have to be thousands, if not tens of thousands, of species. I mean, we're talking about the obvious reason that these animals were brought in the ark because it's the only way they would survive, right? The entire earth was going to be flooded. So first of all, let me ask you this question. Do you think that the entire earth was flooded? Or do you think that just, let's say, the Middle East was flooded?
I don't know. It says, when you look at the Middle East, it's basically flat except for on the coast. On the coast, you have mountains. Now, that's on both sides, from the Gulf Coast and also the Mediterranean coast. That's where your mountains are. In between there, that's basically flat land, especially what's called Mesopotamia. So to the north, you have mountains. That's your Zagros Mountains chain and the Taurus Mountains. And then you have the mountain range along the Gulf Coast of Arabia, and then what we call the mountain range of Israel. They have mountains there too. How high they are, I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But those are where your hills are. Anywhere in between that, it's flat. Roughly flat. I'm not going to say it's completely dead flat, but it's roughly flat. Now, the Torah says that the floods went up so many cubits above the high hills. What does that mean? If you're in the plain of the Middle East, the nearest hills you're going to have are going to be, like I said, along the coast of the Persian Gulf or the Arab Gulf, however you want to call it, the Mediterranean basin, and then what we call the Caucasus. Those are the mountains in the north. To the south, you have also mountains on the Yemen side. You have the mountains on that side. So basically, what we call the Middle East is composed of those mountains, and then everything in between those, which would be pretty much.
Okay, but whatever. That's not my point. I mean, do you believe that the entire? And I'm not putting you on the spot because I don't know the answers to these at all. These are things I've been thinking about again for years. Do you think the entire Earth was flooded, or just a portion of the Earth around wherever Mount Ararat is?
Well, there used to be a debate about it, and I used to do a lot of core sampling. I've done it all over the Americas anyway. I've bored here in Europe, and it's the same thing. Whenever you bore on top of a mountain, we still find even in the different rock layers, and the overburden, which is the crap you got to drill through to get to the rock. We find all sorts of fossils of marine life. You find that even on the top. I don't care what mountain you go to, and so people have stated that they're there because at one time all of the Earth's crust was created while it was underwater and then rose out of the water. So that's
or not necessarily. Or there were areas that happened to be underwater and then later dried up. There were large seas. There might have been large inland seas that they speak about, or large areas.
However, it was under the waters at one time, and then however it happened, it came out of the water.
Right.
Now those marine fossils could have been. We know that at the beginning it says the world was covered with water, and then some water was taken away, and then the dry land appeared. Now it could have been at that event, or it could have been the event of the flood. Me personally, I could say it could be both. I don't know. The second question was, where'd all the water come from? Now,
wait a second. I just want to say that. Okay, so let's assume for a second that it was the entire Earth. Okay, let's just assume for a second if it was the entire Earth. Okay, if it was the entire Earth, you have how many species of mammals? Because what was taken onto the book was mammals and not mammals, was basically anything that can't survive on the land, plus all of the birds, because they can't survive without having access to the land. They can't just fly around forever, right? So basically every animal pretty much that cannot survive in the water for a long period of time was taken onto the ark, okay? I don't know how many species that is exactly, but I'm going to venture to guess. Let's throw out a number of 10,000. I don't know. Maybe more, maybe less. I don't know. Let's say 10,000, okay? So you have 10,000 species of different animals which you have to care for, for a period of approximately a year. You have to feed them. You have to take care of them. You have to make sure they get their exercise. You have to house them. You have to make sure they don't eat each other, right? I mean, if you have a mouse in one cage and then you have a cat in the same cage, that's going to be under the mouse, and now you've lost mice forever, according to this story, okay? And let's say it covered the entire Earth, okay? Let's say the flood covered the entire Earth, okay? How are kangaroos going to get to the ark? How are polar bears going to get to the ark? And then afterwards, how are they going to get back to Australia and not leave any trace of their presence in the ark, right? I mean, if they were all released and they all walked happily off the ark, how the heck did they get back to Australia? So what the heck is going on here? I'm sorry to say, I'm a believing. I'm a believer in Torah, but this story just does not make any sense. It doesn't make any sense at all to run a zoo of maybe 20 or 30 or 100 species. Wait a second. If 100 species is already hard enough, you need millions of dollars of funding, and you need a staff of hundreds of people, and you need cages and cleaners, and who cleaned the poop off the ark, right? I mean, it takes a huge staff just to run a zoo of maybe 100 species, and now you're talking about 10,000 species from all over the world who came onto this ark, which was the size of a football field, smaller than any modern zoo, and much smaller than any modern zoo, and they had to be maintained for a year, with food, with veterinary care, with poop disposal, it just does not make any sense. The only thing possibly that would make sense, would be that the flood was localized. If the flood was localized and maybe there were certain species in the area which didn't exist in other areas that had to be brought on the ark, then maybe I could possibly see it. But even then, how are you going to get all this? I mean, we have such a huge diversity of wildlife, that they couldn't have all come off the ark. And if they didn't come all off the ark, then it means that they were around in other areas. So let's say you have I can't even think of something like the Middle Eastern mountain lion, okay? So let's say that was taken on the ark, okay? In order to save it, okay? Well, if it's in other areas nearby, why did you need to take it on the ark? They could have repopulated from other areas. To make a long story short, this story, it just does not make sense. I'm sorry, it doesn't make any sense. Well, the bottom line is, when you think about it, it just does not make sense. So what are we left with? We're left with either a localized flood where animals are brought on symbolically, or we're left with a story that's basically just an analogy or an exaggeration or a metaphor, or some kind of allegory. That's the word I'm looking for. I don't know. I don't know what to say, but it's the truth.
Okay, verse 3.
No, wait a second. That's it. You're just gonna drop that?
What is it I'm supposed to prove?
I don't know. I mean, you don't have to prove anything. I'm just curious your opinion. I mean, so do you? No, I'm just curious. You don't want to say. Do you believe that it actually happened? And if so, to what extent?
Yeah, I believe it actually happened.
So how did the kangaroos get to Noah's Ark?
Well, this is where we have a problem.
Yeah, I'll say we have a big problem.
Okay. So one of the biggest problems we tackle with the Torah is the years, the timeline itself. If we accept that the timeline in the Torah may not quite be accurate, that life has been around much longer than what we see in the Torah. And this is where you have like these fundamentalist people come in. Oh, it's only 6,000 years that the universe existed, which
according to biocentrism, to relate back to what we were saying earlier, until man stepped foot on this earth and was able to use his consciousness to resolve, probability waves into actual events, that's actually true, but not in the way that the creationists think. It's just that
right.
everything that happened up until that point, you can't even talk about up until that point. When Adam was created, he perceived everything as if from his perspective that it had always been there, even though without human consciousness, it may have not been there. Although there was the consciousness of God, which could have resolved the probability waves into actual events. So God was already there. But anyway, I don't want to sidetrack. Yeah.
So anyhow, if we accept that the timeline itself may not be quite right, it's not exactly 6,000 years of universal history. Life could have been around a lot longer than that, and that's what we see by geological evidence.
Right.
That the scientists say, "Oh, life's been around at least 60,000 years." Okay. Now they say the Earth's been around for 4 billion years or so. Maybe I don't remember. Anyways, a long time.
The Earth's been around for I think around 5 billion or something like that.
Yeah. All right, so we don't know exactly how long it is. No one was really there, and I don't really care. But we have a story. No matter where you go on the planet, there's some people are going to have some kind of their version of the flood story, and that suggests either that story came in later, or it was from the very beginning, and everyone had a historical memory that they were passing down throughout the generations.
Sure.
And now, we all know that the world, all of the land masses, were at one time together.
Right.
Now, according to geologists who say that everything creeps along at the same slow pace it's always has been, it's never changed, and they don't take into account anything that might have happened that could have sped it up. Of course, it's going to be a long time. When that happened, we don't really know. The land masses were all together.
Wait a second. So stop a second. So you're saying, if I'm reading through the lines now, you're claiming, and I'm putting you on the spot because I don't have the answers here. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of it and trying to pick your brain and playing devil's advocate to bring out certain points which don't make sense. So are you saying Pangea, that was called, or actually a number of points they say in the geological history of the Earth where all the landmass came together, but the most recent one, if I remember correctly, is called Pangea, and they say it was maybe 60 million years ago. I don't remember how many millions of years ago. So you're saying Pangea was not, let's just assume for the sake of argument that Pangea, when all of the continents were together, was 60 million years ago. Are you saying that it really wasn't 60 million years ago? It was really 5,500 years ago in the time of Noah? Is that what you're saying?
No, I'm saying
okay.
we may not.
All right.
We may not. Look, the the flood story predates the Torah. Okay,
Right.
it predates the people of Israel.
Right.
The earliest written record we have is in the Sumerians, and it basically says a
Yeah, the
similar
Epic of
story.
Gilgamesh. Right.
No, it was even before the Epic of Gilgamesh.
Oh, okay. The Sumerian. Sure.
It's Utnapishtim, I think.
Yes. Right. I'm sorry. Right. That's right.
And
No, Utnapishtim he was in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but it doesn't matter. Anyway, there were a bunch of flood stories.
He was the one who actually built the first boat, which was according to this Sumerologist. I can't remember his name, but he's a pretty cool guy. He's got a big beard, long hair, works in England. I know you know who I'm talking about. I can't remember his name.
Yes, I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah, the guy who does YouTube videos. He's great.
Yeah, I love watching this guy. But anyway, he went out to Iraq. To
the British guy. The British guy.
Yeah, it proved that it was basically round and not square because the Sumerian text said it was round.
Yeah, what was round? I'm sorry. What was round instead of square?
He said in the Sumerian text, the ark was round and it wasn't a box. It wasn't square. And he actually proved it and proved that a round box, you could have made it as big as or a round ark, you could have made it as big as you wanted to make it. And just by the design of those type of boats, it would be a better quality than what the normal cube type ark that most people talk about is. Okay. But anyway, the point I'm getting at is I'm saying that the timeline in the Torah may not be right. These are probably retellings of stories that were longer than than that. Look, we know even in the case of Göbekli Tepe.
Wait a second. Stop. Wait a second. I want to hold you to some of the things you say. Again, not to put you on the spot, because I don't know the answers, and I don't know if anybody knows the answers. But you're saying now that the Torah is not divine, that this is just a retelling of some story from another culture? Is that what you believe?
Why does it have to be one or the other?
Of course, it has to be one or the other, because or you're saying that this story. Let's put it this way. Are you saying that this story is not divine? It's just the Israelites just took this flood legend from another culture and included it along with some of the divine revelations that they received?
Where did Abraham?
So the Torah is actually. I understand he came from Samaria. So you think he brought the legend of the Sumerian legend of the flood together with him, and that made its way into the Torah? So the Torah is actually a hybrid document, partially divine and partially not divine? Is that what you're saying?
Why does it have to be one or the other?
I don't understand. What's the other alternative?
Look, we know that the Torah, the only thing that was really a divine document was the Torah written on the tablets of stone that, according to this book, was given to Moses. That was written by the hand of God.
So you've given your answer.
Everything.
So you've given your answer. Fine. So you think it's a hybrid document?
More than likely, yeah. The stories.
All right. Well, there you go. Then that's your anscer.
Yeah.
I don't reject that answer necessarily, because I'm troubled by this and other things that just don't make sense. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The stories that we have of the flood, the creation, the dispersion of humanity, we see those written long before that, long before the Torah.
Obviously.
Now, the Torah has its own version of it, and the Sumerian text has its own version of it.
Obviously,
but what we don't know from either document is what the actual version really was. There had to have been some time before that when they were all the same thing. But that's all I'm getting at.
Not necessarily. It could have been orally passed down and then made its way into the written records of various cultures. But okay, at any rate, could have been this person remembered it this way and that person remembered it that way, and each person. But it doesn't matter. What you're saying is, and I just want to clarify if I'm understanding you correct. You are saying, you, Hakham Yaakov ben Yisrael of the World Alliance of Qara'im, are stating officially that you do not believe the Torah to be, every word of it to be divine, meaning written by the divine hand and passed to Moshe, that you believe basically it's a hybrid document, that it's maybe some divine revelation recorded word for word by Moshe, interspersed with stories, legends, histories, oral oral law, oral histories, etc. Is that what you believe?
All right. If it were divine document written by the hand of God, then, one, there wouldn't be any need for the Karaketiv, wouldn't be any need for the corrections that we see in the text.
No, sure there would. Sure there would, because that's much later, and that could because that would be a result of yeah. That would be a result of textual errors. No, but okay. Go ahead.
No, you're not going to let me finish, or
I'm going to let you finish. Go ahead. Go.
Right.
I'm sorry.
The book that we have today is not the Torah. Okay, this is what we have left. This is what the scribes and elders over time have preserved for us. When you show me the actual tablets of stone, then I'll tell you what was written on it.
Fine.
But you're not.
But
okay. So now to claim what we have in here is 100% the divine, inerrant word of God, as most Christians put it, is nonsense.
Fine. And that's your opinion. And I'm not necessarily. I think it's a completely valid opinion to arrive at. But
I look at it this way: it doesn't have to be. These are
no, but it does. Then what the hell are we wasting our time studying it for? We should only be studying the divine word of God. We don't need. Why would I? Then if that's the case, then why waste our time studying the flood story at all? If it's clearly not from God, it's just it's just a regurgitated version of a flood story that comes from Samaria. I might as well study the Epic of Gilgamesh right now rather than study the Torah. No, I'm serious. It becomes a big problem, because what's the point then of studying the Torah at all? But I just want to give my opinion, if I can. I believe it has to be divine, or else there's no point to any of this. But I just don't have answers. I don't have answers. The whole flood story, as thinking about it, how it could have occurred. Is it an allegory? Did it actually occur? Was there some kind of prehistoric science, or this is not even prehistory, I guess. Primordial science that we don't understand. Was the Earth very different? We know people lived for 800, 900 years back then, according to the Torah. Maybe something was very different back then. Maybe something we're missing completely. I have to believe that this is the divine word of Yehovah. Every single word of it, minus some textual errors, like you said, the Ketiv and the Kri, which come from later textual errors. It has nothing to do with the original book of the Torah, and most of the Kri and Ketiv are very minor corrections. But I just have to. My opinion is that every single word of it basically has to be divine, and that I don't understand how this could have happened. It doesn't make any sense to me on a logical basis. But it's either that I'm not understanding what the Torah is trying to say, or that I'm not understanding science, and that if I understood both perfectly, then somehow they would merge. That's my conclusion. But I don't reject their conclusion. It's a completely valid conclusion, but it is, I guess it's a bit, and I'm totally not trying to put you on the spot, but I guess I'm a little bit shocked that you are saying that you believe that basically much of the Torah is not divine, because that's essentially what you're saying here.
The only thing that was ever divine was the tablets written on stone that were delivered to Moses. Now those are lost. We don't know where they are.
Then why the hell are we wasting our time? Why not just skip this section, since it's clearly not divine? No, really. What are we wasting our time here for?
Okay. Now we have at least 4 different traditions, and all 4 of those have slightly different versions of it. We have the Samaritan version, we have the Jewish version, we have the Septuagint, which is the Greek version that was from the Alexandrian Jews.
Yeah, but that's a translation. That's a translation of the original Hebrew version, so that doesn't count, right?
Well, what was the original?
Original was Hebrew.
That's
translated by.
All right. Now, the Septuagint and Masoretic text don't match everywhere. Okay.
True.
The Samaritan and the Jewish text don't match. There's places where even the Dead Sea Scrolls, what we call the Qumran text, and all of them, they differ completely. But there's places where they they all coincide. So we know that there was originally a text that all of them took from. What it was, we don't know because it didn't survive. And so we have to ask ourselves, who actually has the true Torah? Is it the Masoretic text, which was around from after the Jews were sent into exile by the Romans? Or was it what the Qumran people have? And we don't really actually have all of the Torah from Qumran's. To be fair, that was a depository. And one of my good Samaritan friends, who's a really great scholar by himself, he always puts forth this fragment that talks about Har Gerizim being the place where the altar was set up, which the Masoretic text says it was Mount Abel. And he says, oh, well, this is proof that that was the original text. And what I've pointed out time and again is when we look at the Qumran scroll, most of which are fragmented, we don't have every book that they had all in one piece. You only have a certain fragment that he uses as proof, but we don't have the context that this fragment came from. We only assume this is from a Torah scroll. It could have been for a commentary talking about how the Samaritans were wrong. We don't know because
yes, but in all fairness, yeah, again, I want to bring you back to the topic because otherwise it just goes off on a million tangents. Okay, in all fairness, the difference between the Samaritan Torah and the Judean Torah, if you want to call it that, there are minor differences, except for some actual textual differences.
There's actually serious. There
are like the 11th commandment of Mount Gerizim, etc. Like Nishma v'na'aseh. Got it. But most of but those things can clearly be traced back to, in my opinion, Samaritan distortions, the deliberate Samaritan distortions of the Torah. But at any rate, most of the Torah is the same. It doesn't matter. Let's say it's irrelevant.
Yeah, wait a minute. If you're telling me this is divine, it does matter.
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. It doesn't. Because what I'm saying is that
you have to be able to prove what the original. In order to say that it's a distortion, you have to be able to prove what was the original.
It doesn't. And it's not relevant.
It is not relevant.
Wait, it's not. No, it's not relevant. It's not relevant to the current discussion. It's not. Okay. It's not. It's an interesting side discussion. Is the Samaritan Torah the correct one?
It's not relevant. If it's not relevant, let's move on because that's just nonsense.
No. Wait a second. No. Wait a second. Okay? It's not relevant because it doesn't matter at the end of the day. Let's say it turns out the Samaritan Torah is.
That's what I'm saying. It doesn't matter. I agree with you. It doesn't matter.
No, but you're not letting me make my point. What does matter, there is something that does matter. And no. Yeah. Let's say the Samaritan Torah is correct. Okay? It doesn't matter. Let's say that's the original one, and the Judean Torah is a distortion of the original Samaritan Torah. Okay, or let's say the Qumran version is the correct one, and the Judean and the Samaritan Torahs are distortions. Or let's say we don't have the original one, and all three are distortions of an original one. Whatever that original one is, it's still pretty close to the one we're using. Pretty close. Okay, pretty close. It's not the exact same thing, but it's still pretty close to the one we're using. Okay, and still, whatever that original text is. The question still arises: is that to get back to the other statement? Is that text a divine text, or is that text not a divine text? And that's the main point here. Okay, and as I said, my personal opinion is I have to believe, even just for the sake of my own sanity, I've got to believe that every single word in the Torah, aside from some textual errors here, or maybe the Samaritan version is the right one, but basically every word in the Torah is basically divine. Or else there's no point in me even being here. What am I studying then? Just another society with another epic, with another flood story. And not only that, what's the whole point of anything? If the Torah is not divine, then that is basically, we lose our complete bearing in this world. Because I have to wake up for my own sanity. I have to wake up every single day and believe that every single word of the Torah is divine. Or else, then I have no, anchor to my ship. I have no, what's the word? I have no rudder to my ship. This is the basis. This is the rudder for my very life. So I have to, if even I'm being intellectually dishonest and for my own sanity, I've got to say that every word of the Torah, with maybe some minor textual errors, maybe it is the Samaritan version, or the Qumran version is true. And it's just that I have some lack of understanding here. I'm not understanding what the story of the flood is exactly trying to say. Maybe science is completely wrong. Maybe there is some kind of primordial science, but the world was actually very different 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, which scientists have not been able to uncover. I don't know what the answer is, but I just know that given the current science that we know, and given the story of the flood, it just does not make sense. It doesn't make sense. That's the bottom line. It can't make sense. You can't have thousands upon thousands upon thousands of animals being run by a family of 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 people, running basically a zoo, 3,000 times the size of the Cincinnati Zoo or whatever the famous zoo is in America, and for a year. And taking care of all those logistics and getting kangaroos from Australia and polar bears from Alaska and the emus from Peru or wherever the heck they live, I think Peru, and getting them all over the ship. It doesn't make sense. Okay. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the topic.
So we have a question. It says, or actually a statement and a question. It has to be God's word. Otherwise, why believe Torah over Sumerian epics when it comes to creation law?
Exactly.
And, this is what I was getting at earlier. There's always, they use the Sumerian epics and so forth to always point the finger at people who believe in the Torah. Now, I actually happen to believe in the Torah. I like the Torah. It makes perfect sense to me.
But you don't believe in the Torah.
No, I never said that.
You don't believe every word is divine, or maybe a small fraction of it is divine.
No, I said the Torah itself is the only thing that would be considered divine. What we have to actually come to the conclusion of is what is the Torah itself. And I have a different definition of Torah than most people. But anyway, the point is, get back to...
But again, to clarify that statement, you mean that a subset of the 5 books of Moses that we have right now, you believe only a subset is divine?
The Torah, the way I see it, is the 2 tablets of stone that were written front and back. And they only carried the mitzvot, the commandments.
All right.
And that includes all the commandments that you see from the time that Moses went on the mountain to speak with God, the instructions for the building of the Mishkan and its utensils, and that's it. The tablets didn't include, for instance, the commandment concerning Zelophehad and his daughters, because Moses, that happened at the time of Eleazar the priest. That was long after.
That's clearly divine. But that's clearly divine, right? Because it says so explicitly that Moses asked God for that ruling.
And I'm not necessarily saying that that's not. I'm just saying the Torah itself, the only thing that was given was the 2 tablets of stone. Now, that doesn't mean that the inspiration Moses received later wasn't divine. I'm just saying that wasn't included on the tablets of stone. We know it couldn't have been because...
But this is slippery slope that you're now presenting now, because if the flood story is not divine, whatever, is not God's version of the flood story, then maybe the story about Abraham is. But you are saying that.
I'm not saying that.
Then what are you saying?
I'm saying that what we have in our hands may not be the correct story. We don't know what the original was. We don't have that.
But whatever it is, it's going to be somewhat. It's going to be somewhat similar, right?
Right. It's going to be pretty close. Maybe 100% the same. Now, what I'm getting at with this question here about why I believe the Torah over the Sumerian epics. Now, what a lot of people used to use and point their finger at people who believed in the Torah was, oh, look, we found it here in Sumeria. It was written different. Okay. Now, the story of, for instance, let's say the Babylonian creations, you have Marduk, Marduk slays the primordial water, the chaotic water, which is called Tiamat, which is etymologically very similar to what we call Tehom. What did he do? He destroyed this Tiamat, cut the body in two, created the heavens with one part, and created the earth with the second part. And from that lower part that he created the earth, he created the first two human beings.
Fine. But Yaakov, what is your point?
Well, if you let me finish, I'll get to it.
Go ahead, finish.
Yeah, but if you keep interrupting me every time,
Well, I'm just trying to make you stick to the point.
I'm answering the question.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah. And so, when we look in the Torah as we have it now, it says that there was this primordial chaotic waters, which is identified as Tehom. Those waters were split, and from that you have the waters above, the waters below, dry land appears, and God fashioned the first humans from the earth itself, which would be considered the lower part of the Tehom. And so you have two stories about creation, and if you look at them really, from one side they seem very polytheistic and whatever, but from the other side, from the side we have, I believe we have the actual correct. It wasn't many gods. And so they both originate from an original source. What Abraham brought into Canaan with him, in my opinion, was what he delivered to his sons and so forth. And that's what we have today that Moses wrote, supposedly. And so I say that
what you're
the
saying,
correct version will be what was in the Torah. But they both have an original source.
but that's right. But that original source is not God, in your opinion.
No, I never said that.
But that's what you're saying. You're saying Abraham brought it from Sumeria. That's exactly what you're saying.
Abraham was born in.
Where did he get it from? Right.
He would have been one who he was the first person that we know of in the Torah as a prophet. And if we accept that there are prophets who speak with God, that's why we have a corrected version of it. And
then we don't need. Then we don't need this. We don't need to come. If Abraham was the prophet, it doesn't have to come from Samaria. It comes directly from God. You're still right.
I didn't say it. No, you keep putting words in my mind. I never said it came from Samaria. I'm saying both. What you see in Samaria and what we see in the Tanakh came from an original source. What we have is the preserved original version of it. Okay.
So now you're saying that it is divine. It wasn't revealed to Moshe. It was revealed to Abraham, right? That's what you're saying.
Well, that's a tough question. If we actually accept that the Torah is correct, then Shem lived until the time of Abraham, Isaac, and I think he died just before Jacob was born. So they would have had it from Shem personally.
So whoever it is, it's passed down from some prophet. Maybe it was Adam passed it down from Shem, and then Shem passed it down to Abraham. But if you look at the lifespans,
fine. Seth and his son would have lived even until the time of Noah. So they would have at least first person account.
Okay. Besides the fact that I'm really sorry to put you on the spot like a lawyer and giving a deposition here or something like that, but I just really want to get to the bottom.
I don't really care.
No,
I'm saying to me it doesn't matter. Okay.
But it has to matter. It has to matter.
It doesn't matter.
Okay. See, my answer is
when I'm dead. Look, I'm not sitting in Israel. There's no temple on the Temple Mount. I don't see any fire that's dropping out of heaven doing anything. Okay. And when that happens, then we'll know what the truth is. Until then, neither you or anybody alive can tell me what the truth really is.
No,
we can only say this is what we believe it is. This is what we think it is. No one has the original that they can lay out and say this is absolute, positive. This is where it is. You can't do that.
Yes, but you're contradicting. But you're contradicting yourself. In all fairness,
I'm not contradicting myself.
You are, because earlier you said it's not divine, and now you're saying it is divine. Maybe the source isn't Moses.
What we have here in our hands is not the divine document that was given to Moses.
Okay, fine. But you're saying it is a divine document. It comes from some divine source. And if it does,
I would say that, yes.
fine. Then how do you explain kangaroos on the ark?
The point I was getting at earlier was about the timeline that we have. Okay, we have two things. We have one of two things: either what we have today in this written Torah, the timeline may not be correct. Okay, or science is full of crap. All right, and the Earth didn't separate. That Pangea didn't separate into what we have today 60 million years ago. It was much earlier than that. So you only have two possible choices, okay? Either science is correct, and that happened 60 million years ago when everything divided around and carried the different species of animals, which some died out, some produced other offspring that came separate species themselves. Or you accept the Torah as being divine. So if you say it's divine, then it's only 6,000 years of history from the creation of Adam and the creation of all the animals. Okay, that they all happened on the same day that Adam was created. As far as most of the land animals, there were other animals prior to the 6th day of Adam being created. But we know, according to Torah, which you say is absolute 100% divine, can't be wrong anyway. There's only 6,000 years, unless you can find some way to stretch it out from the birth or from the creation of Adam and his children. I'm not talking about the time before that. We're not even talking about that. I'm talking about from the creation of the animals on this planet until now. Okay?
No. From the creation of Adam, who had human consciousness and who was able to resolve the probability waves into actual events, till now is approximately 6,000 years. Okay? Before that,
we don't
there's
know.
no contradiction whatsoever.
We don't care.
Wait, but
we don't care.
Right, but there's
we don't
But I
care
just want to point out, there's no fine, but there's no contradiction between the 6 days before that being equivalent to 14 billion years. I will point once again not only to the work of or to this idea of quantum physics and biocentrism by Robert Lanza, but I'll also point to the work of Gerald Schroeder, okay, who talks about this very often and relates it not to quantum physics, but actually relates it to the Einstein's theory of relativity and time dilation. Okay, so you can look that up. He's a well-known guy. He was one of the first people I learned when I learned at Asia many years ago.
I understand that. That's getting into prior to Adam. I don't care about anything prior to Adam. Don't care.
Okay. Fine.
We're talking about from the time of Adam until now.
Let's go on to the next verse. But I would like to stay.
Wait a minute. Wait a minute now. This is the dilemma that we're talking about. Either it's 100% divine and science is wrong,
right? Or
the Torah timeline might not be completely correct, and science is more accurate as far as time. And I'm not talking about the creation of the universe or the creation of the world. I'm talking about the creation of human beings on this planet. Right? Okay. That was 50. The what we call Homo erectus or Homo sapiens was only 50, 60,000 years ago. So that in itself says there's something fishy. But me personally, I'm like this. I don't really care.
Okay.
I do care to follow the Torah. I choose to follow the Torah. I'm gonna follow the Torah. I don't care if the Torah said that the sun shed out the earth. Okay. I don't care.
Okay. But I don't understand.
What it tells me to do is the same thing that the U.S. Constitution does without any God writing it. It says I have certain things I'm responsible to do, or that I'm allowed to do, the rights that I have. Okay. And that's the same thing the Torah does. It tells me how to live. It tells me how to interact with my fellow human beings. And everything else I don't care about, because once I'm dead, if there is a resurrection, I'll find out then.
I don't know. I honestly, I find everything you said to be contradictory.
I don't put any. No, it's not contradictory.
I do. And waffling, but
having to be a divine. Yeah.
Okay, so you don't care whether the Torah is divine or not?
I don't care that the U.S. Constitution is divine or not, but people keep those laws.
So then why do you follow? Then why do you follow the Torah? Why? If you don't believe it's divine, why follow it? Why not just go follow, the Quran or something, or become a Hindu?
I follow the Torah because I choose to. That's the choice.
Okay. All right. I don't know. I don't get it. I would just like to state my opinion, which is I do believe the Torah is divine minus small textual errors. I believe it's a divine document, all of it, including the story of the flood, how it meshes with reality is either a lack of understanding on my part of the Torah or a lack of understanding on my part of science. And there would be no contradiction. I believe there would be no contradiction, but I believe that every single word of the Torah, again, minus minor textual errors, is a divine document. There's no reason for me to be here at all if I didn't believe that. I might as well just go study, the text of the Hindu texts or the Buddhist texts or whatever. Anyway, all right. Should we go to the next verse?
If you want.
Okay, go ahead, take it. I'm tired. You probably are too.
I've been here for
3
hours now.
Yeah. What time is it? I don't know. We could end it. It's already 5. It's already
we're
been
on verse.
Yeah.
Well, I'll read to the end of the Aliyah.
Yeah, I'm ready. I can go on as long as you want. I'm fine.
So
I'm enjoying it. By the way, does anyone else have anything to say? I'm curious to hear other people's opinions if they want to chime in.
Oh, actually, we are already finished the first Aliyah. We're on the second Aliyah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we're on verse 3 in chapter 7, verse 3.
Mm-hmm.
So, جمعوا الشمائم شبعة زخار ونكبة لحيوت زيرة على بني كل هارت. And of the flying creatures of the sky, 7, male and female, to preserve or to keep alive seed upon the face of the earth.
Okay.
It's moving slow because we got to copy paste all this. So the next one is verse 4. Ki liyamim ma'ud shiv'a anochi mamtir al ha'aretz 40 يوم و40 ليلة ومحيثي اذكر هيقوم أشير عسيثي من عن بني آدم. So here we go. In 7 more days, or another 7 days, I'm causing it to rain upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights, and I will wipe out everything or every standing thing which I have made upon the face of the earth. Or actually, it doesn't say on the face of the earth; it says on the face of the ground. And just to be clear, sometimes alama and eretz are used a bit ambiguously.
Right. True.
Yeah, because you can have the Eretz Yisrael, which means the land of Israel. Or you can have Haaretz, which means whatever the context dictates.
Right.
So, وَيَعَسْ نُوحْ كَكُلْ عَشَرَ سِوَاهُ Adonai. And so Noah did according to all that Adonai commanded him. And now we're going to have our redundancy that everyone likes to point their finger at.
Say again?
We're going to have the redundancy that everyone likes to
Mhm.
point their fingers at. ونوح بن 600 سنة وحمبول حياة معين على الأرض. And Noah was 600 years old, and the flood was, which is water upon the earth.
Mhm.
So just to make this a little bit smoother, I'm gonna quit copy pasting. If that's all right with everyone.
Yep.
If you'd like me to continue copy pasting, then I'll keep copy pasting. But it takes a little bit of time.
Yeah, I think it's really worth it. It really worth it.
Okay.
It's really worth it. Yeah, and people know exactly what verse we're on, so I think it's worth it. Uh-oh. What happened? I have to do this differently.
So, ויבוא נוח ובניו ואשתו ונשי בניו איתו אל התיבה מפני מי המבול. And so Noah entered, or he came in, and his sons and his wife and the wives or the women of his sons with him into the ark or the box from the presence of the waters of the flood.
Mhm.
And then we're on verse 8. So you're saying it's better without? Someone said it's better without pasting. Taking up too much time. All right.
All right.
So
Whatever
this will be the
everyone
last one
wishes.
I post.
I think I think it's really good because for those who are tuning in, not now maybe, but later on
Later? Yeah.
on YouTube, because there's a
That's the whole
constant question.
point.
Yeah, and whenever I'm doing studies, it's what verse are you on? 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 With the verses pasted, I think it's a good thing because it lets people know exactly what verse we're talking about. So, I don't know who suggested not pasting it, but screw them.
So we're chapter 7, verse 8.
Right.
من حبهما الطهورة ومن حبهما أشر أينن طهورة ومنها عوف وكل أشر رميس على الآدمة. And of the clean beasts and of the beasts that were not clean, and of the flying things of the air, and all that creeps upon the earth. And what I'll probably do next time is probably go ahead and paste these in here before we start.
All right.
And then all I got to do is click on them.
It doesn't matter. If it takes a second to copy and paste, I mean, it gives a break for people to think about it anyway. It's not a big deal.
All right, verse 9. Shanaim ba'u il Noah il hateva zachar unakeva ka'asher siwa Elohim et Noah. Two by two they came to Noah to the ark, male and female, as God commanded Noah.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're on verse 10, chapter 7, verse 10. وهي لشبعة הימים ומי המבול היו על הארץ. And it was the 7 days, and the waters of the flood were upon the earth.
Mm-hmm.
This is pretty cool. This is where everybody gets into later on. I think the Enoch calendar, or if I'm thinking it right. So verse 11, chapter 7, verse 11. בשנת 600 שנה לחיי נוח, בחודש השני, ב17 יום לחודש, ביום הזה נפקעו כל מעיינות תהום רבה, وحروبות השמיים נפתחו. And this is going to be a bit funny. So in the 600th year of the life of Noah, in the second month, in the 17th day of the month, on that very day, all the Me'yonoth, which are the fountains of the heavens, burst, or burst the fountains of the great Tehom, not the heavens.
Right.
And the Arubbo Hashemayim. Now, this word Aruba in modern Hebrew means a chimney, but it also is used in the Tanakh later as a chimney as well.
Well, Aruba in modern Hebrew actually it means like a pipe.
Yeah, a pipe.
Like a main pipe kind of thing.
And so, but what it's talking about here are the windows of the skies, niftahu, were opened.
And I would like to point something out here, which is, okay, if you look at, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going by memory, but you'll see these diagrams. If you look up like biblical cosmology, or, biblical, I think biblical cosmology would do it. Something along those lines of biblical, structure of the world or something like that. Probably biblical cosmology. You'll get these diagrams that they always show, which is, it would be like the Earth being flat, resting on a body of water, which is the home, and then supported by pillars, because I guess in Psalms and maybe in Job and some other places it speaks about the Earth being supported by pillars, and then a dome above, or a rakia above, like a sky above. And then above the sky more waters. Those are the waters that were separated. On the third day of creation, perhaps, whenever it was, when the waters from above were separated from the waters below, etc., etc. If you look it up, you'll get this entire schematic of the way that supposedly the ancient Israelites viewed the cosmology of the world. And so what a lot of people say, and I don't think they're correct, but what a lot of people say is that this in fact, they get that cosmology partially from this verse, that they believe that there were waters above the sky and waters below the ground, and that what happened here is that basically God punctured a hole in the rakia, in the sky, and out came the waters that were above the sky pouring onto the earth, and then he punctured holes in the ground, and out came the waters from the Tehom, from beneath the earth, and that's what flooded the earth. So people will take this. Can you still hear me?
Hello? Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, so people will take this verse and they'll say that it proves how stupid the ancient Israelites were, that they think there's waters above the sky and waters below the earth is floating on a body of water supported by pillars, like an oil tanker out in the middle of the ocean or something like that. And look how stupid these ancient Israelites are, that they thought that the God punctured, basically God opened up these waters from above and below, and that's what flooded the earth. So to point out, I guess the point is to realize that no, the ancient Israelites were not that stupid, and these are just meant as as basically poetic ways of saying that the seas flooded from below, I guess due to the storm, and these arubot hashemayim, these pipes, or these main funnels or tunnels that were opened up from the sky, is just a poetic way of saying the rain, or massive amounts of rain. So just wanted to point that out.
So verse 12. ويهي هجاشم على الأرض أربعين يوم وأربعين ليلة.
Hmm.
And so the rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights.
Mm-hmm. The same amount of time, right? 40 is used throughout the Tanakh. Okay, 40 days famously until Nineveh is overturned, right? 40 yom Nineveh nehefechet. I can't remember which vowelization they use there, but nehefechet in modern Hebrew anyway. And that's Jonah gave that prophecy to Nineveh. 40. I'm trying to think where else 40 is used. 40 days that weren't Moshe and Aaron up on, or wasn't Moses up on Sinai for 40 days, if I'm not mistaken?
Yeah, I think so.
40. 40 days. Let's see, where else does it apply? I'm not in front of the computer right now, so I can't do a search on 40. But this number 40 is a common number. We learned in yeshiva many years ago that 40 always has to do with some kind of judgment. I don't think that's a correct interpretation, but that's what they always said, that, when you ever see the word 40, it has to do with some kind of judgment upon the earth. So, okay, there were 40 days until Nineveh is going to be overturned in the book of Jonah, the book of Yonah, and there are 40 days here that God is, punishing the earth. And I'm not sure how they explain the 40 days that Moshe spent up on the mountain with no food and water, but somehow that's related to punishment as well, or related to, to a warning of punishment. Anywho, just to point out that 40, like 7, which is a number that's used a lot, like 10, that's a number that's used a lot, sevenfold, tenfold, 40, these are numbers that appear again and again throughout the Torah, throughout the Tanakh, I should say.
So, verse 13. بعدسم هيوم هزي با نوح وشيم وحام ويافث بني نوح وعيشة نوح وشروشة نشي بناف إتام.
We never know the name of Eshet Noah. We never know the name of Noah's wife. I don't think it's listed anywhere. So she's just Eshet Noah.
And so on that same day, Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, came in to the ark, and the wife of Noah and the 3 wives of his sons with them. We got a couple more verses, and then we'll be done with the second Aliyah. Wow.
Sounds good.
So, verse 14. هيما وقول هيا لمنا وقول هبهما لمنا وقول هرامس حرميس على هارت لمنيه وقول هعوف لمنيه كل سبور كل كناف. Them, or they, and all of the living, or the animals, according to his kind, and all the beasts of it, according to his kind, and all the creeping things that creep upon the earth, according to his kind, and every flying or winged creature, according to his kind, every sipor, which is a bird of wing, every bird, every wing.
Yep.
So, let me go here. So, verse 15. ويبوء نوح إلى حتبان شنايم مكل הבשר أشر بو روح حيim. And so they came to Noah, to the ark, 2 by 2 of all flesh, which had the spirit or breath of life in it.
Which implies, by the way, that there's something divine going on here, right? Because we're not talking about Noah didn't have to go around and capture all these animals. They
No, he brought them to
walked.
him. Yeah, he said they'd bring them to him.
What's that?
God said he would bring them. He said, I'm bringing them to you.
Right. So my point is that already it implies, if we want to believe the historicity, the truth of the story or not, then already the story is talking about, is basically talking about, some kind of divine miracles going on here, some kind of supernatural thing going on here, right?
Yep.
That the
So
animals just naturally knew to walk there.
the last verse of the second Aliyah is verse 16. وهبائيم זכר ונקבה מכל בשר באו כאשר סיווה אותו אלוהים ויסגור אדוני בעדו. And those coming, or the ones entering, male and female of all flesh, they came as God commanded him. And Adonai closed after him, or we're assuming this is the door, he shut after him. Ba'ado. This is an interesting word too. We have this actually in Arabic, ba'd, when we say after. Like normally you say after in Hebrew as acher or acharit or something like that. Acharona means the backward side or the end. In Arabic, you would say ba'd. You have the exact same word, ba'd. Ba'd al-amal, after work, or you say ba'd al-akhal, after eating, or something like that.
Yeah.
But anyway, it's assumed, it doesn't say exactly what was shut. It just says that Adonai shut it after him. So we assume that it's talking about the door because we know there was actually a door in the side of the ark. And there had to be some way that they entered into the ark. So it's logical to assume that he's speaking about shutting the door.
Right.
So after everyone went in, he shut the door, and then the rain, I guess, started, or maybe it started while they were entering. Which it doesn't actually have to be mutually at the same time, because we don't know how long it took for them to get in the ark on that day, but we just know that on that same day, the rain started. And so that will be my last verse for this evening. If you want, I'll leave it on. If you want to keep going.
I'm good. I think it's enough. I think it's enough.
But I would like to thank everyone who joined us. Thank you for the questions. I love it when people engage and get involved.
Yeah, and if anyone has any questions right now, anyone wants to bring anything up before we go, yeah.
I'll be right back. If you want to explain that, I'll be right back.
On the back, I can't even see. Hold on a second. Oh, the rabbinic notion of no-hide laws. Okay, I can do that. So I think, to make a long story short, okay, if I remember the 7 no-hide laws, it's going to be, I can't remember, I'd have to look them up, but it's one of them is ever mina chai, not to pull a living limb off an animal or eat a living limb off an animal. Number 2 is to set up system courts of justice. Number 3 is not to worship idols. Number 4 is, I believe, not to murder. And let me look it up. It's been a while since I did. 7 no-hide laws. 7 laws of Noah.
Okay. Not to worship idols, not to curse God, to establish courts of justice, not to commit murder, not to commit adultery, bestiality, or sexual immorality, not to steal, not to eat flesh torn from a living animal. So, my opinion regarding the 7 Noahide laws is that they are not inclusive enough. I think that the Torah is a lesson and a code of ethics for the entire world as taught through Israel, but with the proviso, with the understanding that there are certain portions of the Torah which do not relate to the rest of the world. So the example I always like to give is the bringing of the Passover sacrifice. Okay, if you are if you are an Indonesian or a Moroccan, non-Jewish Moroccan, or an American, you don't have to bring the Passover sacrifice. You're not required to bring the Passover sacrifice. So there are specific things within the Torah which clearly apply to Israel, and I think that those things are clearly pointed out. It's obvious that they applied it to Israel. For instance, Brit Milah is something that is a covenant between Israel and God. It's not required for other people to do a Brit Milah unless they plan to enter the actual covenant. So it's clear where certain things apply to Israel. However, I think there are many more laws than just these 7 that apply to the entire world. So the example I always like to give is the laws of kashrut, which ironically were raised in this week's portion that we just read. Right? We saw that Noah was to bring 7 pairs of clean animals. The modern way of saying clean animals would be kosher animals. So Noah was instructed to bring 7 pairs of kosher animals onto the ark. We also saw that Hevel sacrificed a kosher animal. Okay, he was a ro'etzon. He was a shepherd. Okay, so the idea of kosher is an example of something that applies to all of humanity. Okay, and why does it apply to all of humanity? Because every human being has an innate sense, if they connect with their essence, with their soul, clearly enough, that some animals are okay to eat and some animals are disgusting to eat. I happen to be a vegetarian, so I don't eat any animals with the exception of fish once in a while, and chicken once in a while, maybe once a year or something like that, if I'm really in the mood, and I always regret it afterwards. But I do. It's always like a ta'ava. It's always like a lust that says I gotta have a little bit of chicken, which I haven't had for an entire year, and then I taste it, and it's disgusting, and I feel sick afterwards. And I say, "What? That was very disappointing." Which is always the way that lusts and ta'avot, and meat is a ta'ava, is a lust. It says explicitly a number of times in the Torah that meat is related to lusting. So that's the way lusts always work. They look good before you engage in them, and then once you engage in them, you kind of say that wasn't as good as I thought it would be. And they regret it. Maybe the classic example in the Tanakh of that would be the case of Amnon and Tamar, where Amnon really wanted Tamar so bad that he, concocted a whole scheme of pretending to be sick so that Tamar would come and bake him bread, and then he raped her, and then afterwards it says that he hated her more than he had ever loved her, because the lust caused him to do this, and then after the actual thing happened, then it was like, this is not as good as I thought it was going to be. This, get this, woman out of my face. Anyway, I've gone off track. So to get back on track, so with kosher animals, it's clear that it's disgusting to eat a lobster. Okay, it's a giant sea cockroach. It's clear that it's disgusting to eat a snake. Anyone with any anyone with any modicum of connection to the world would say, I'm not going to eat a snake. I'm not going to eat a cockroach. I'm not going to eat a giant sea cockroach. I'm not going to eat worms. I'm not going to eat I'm not going to eat maggots. And I remember on some of the talk shows in America, they were promoting maggots because they're healthy and full of protein. There was one talk show where they cooked a maggot salad. I kid you not. You can go look it up. I'm sure there were a number of talk shows where they did that. Anyway.
But I wouldn't eat a locust, but that's allowed to eat.
That's right. That's allowed. I don't know why, but it's allowed.
I just don't know why I have this repulsion to a locust, but it's actually clean and you can eat a locust. Right. But that's just, I didn't go down to, the local market and say, hey, let me get a dozen of those fried locusts. That's something I didn't grow up with.
Right. It doesn't make any sense to me either. But remember, it's not all locusts, although I'm not a locust expert, but it has to be locusts where the hind legs reach above the body. So like a praying mantis or something like that, which
I remember when I was growing up, I don't know if it was true or not, but they always told us it was a $50 fine if you kill a praying mantis. I don't know if that was true, but we never touched praying mantises. Yeah, that's what they told us in New York growing up. I have no idea if it was true or not, but we were always afraid to kill praying mantises because we thought there was a $50 fine. Anyway, neither here nor there. I've gotten off track again. So the laws of kashrut clearly apply to all humanity because the idea of a clean or unclean animal, it applies to all humanity. Let's see, what would be another example of something that applies to all of humanity that we can find in the Torah? Well, one of the 7 Noahide laws mentions sexual immorality. That clearly applies to all of humanity, incest and bestiality and so on.
Which calls,
I don't know.
if you think about that logically, God gave us an intellect. Okay, that's what separates us from the other creation, is that we can actually, or we should be able to use our brains and have intellect. That's the whole point. But when we think about it logically, when we read in Leviticus, it talks about what Melech was talking about, the sexual laws and stuff.
Right.
There was a like an end note, if you would, at the end of that section that said it was, you have to, when you come into the land, you have to keep these laws, because the violation of these laws is what caused the land to spew out the people that were before you.
And
so
that's
that was
proof that it applies to them. Yeah. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. And now, also, when we think about the days of Lot, why was Sodom and Gomorrah destroyed? Okay, it tells you several different ways, but not getting into all the specifics. The point is, there were laws that they were supposed to keep. Otherwise, they wouldn't have any sin that reaches up to heaven, and God will say, "Oh, he's a just God. I believe it, that he's a just God. I believe in God. And if I believe in God, I believe he's got to be just. He's not going to destroy somebody just to do it who didn't know beforehand, hey, I shouldn't do this." Okay? And so to destroy those cities, to finally take note, say, okay, I got to go take action. And it's not just Sodom and Gomorrah. It was several other cities of the plain that were destroyed. So they would have been forewarned. When we talk about adultery, for instance, we know that in the case of Abraham, when he goes to Egypt, he tells the people of Pharaoh, the princes of Pharaoh, say, hey, look, this is my sister. Pharaoh took her to be his wife. God plagued him in his house. And in a dream, he told Pharaoh why. Okay. He said, look, man, I didn't know. Well, he didn't say, look, man. He said, look, I didn't know. He told me that was his sister. And God told him, I know that you didn't know, which is why you're still breathing. All right. Otherwise, it would have been done. So adultery should be something. No, Pharaoh knew without God saying, oh, that's because you're committing adultery with this man's wife. So we know adultery too was something that the people understood. That was before the Torah was ever given. And that's just.
But that is listed as one of the rabbinical 7 laws of Noah.
Yeah, well, so what I'm getting at is you can use your intellect by reading Torah and see what would be held also to the nations.
Yeah, and so I think so too.
There's lots of other things you can derive, So
that's
I would say, like you, there's more than just 7.
Yeah. Yep.
But
that's exactly my point. That's exactly my point. My point is that there's a much larger subset than just these 7 laws that applies to humanity, and there are specific things that clearly apply to Israel, such as the bringing of the Passover sacrifice, for instance, such as the holidays would be a good example. Sacrificial system, which is organized by the Levites. I mean, much of the Torah is laws that are specific to the running of the temple, specific to what the nation of Israel has to do in terms of its yearly holidays, its sacrificial system, et cetera, et cetera. Those clearly apply to Israel because that's taking place in Jerusalem and Israel's meant to run them. But then anything that applies to general morality, including many laws that the rabbis don't generally think or don't generally include in the 7 Noahide laws, again, kashrut being a classic example, would be what applies to all humanity. So I agree with Yaakov, actually, 100%, that you can read through the Torah and you can kind of make a logical determination. Is this a law that is applicable to all of humanity, or is this a law that is applicable specifically to the nation of Israel? Just like, in Thanksgiving, it's a law that's really applicable to, the United States of America because it commemorates a specific incident. I mean, I guess it's more complicated than that, but in theory, it commemorates a specific incident that occurred in the history of the United States of America, as does July 4th, right? Would July 4th be relevant to, to Indonesians or to, Peruvians or to the nation of Israel? No, it's not, except that, in modern Israel, they want to be Americans so bad that they celebrate it anyway. But July 4th is a holiday that clearly is relevant only to Americans, okay? Whereas an American law such as, I don't know, whatever, choose an American law might be relevant to all of humanity if other nations choose to follow it. So I think it's a matter of common sense and logic to go through the Torah and to realize which laws are applicable to all of humanity and which laws are applicable only to Israel. I will point out that some people will say that the holidays are applicable to all of the world. I don't think that's true. Certainly the world can help Israel celebrate these holidays, but they're not required by covenants. They're not required by contract to participate in these holidays. Some people will point to Zechariah chapter 7, verse 14, where it says that in the end of days, if the nations don't come up, right, and if the nations don't come up and sacrifice and bow before the Almighty during Sukkot, then they will not get rain the following year. Again, that's not a commandment. They are not required by commandment to do it. It's just, it would be in their best interest to come up to Jerusalem and if they want rain. But they're not obligated by contractual obligation to come up to Jerusalem and sacrifice during Sukkot. So I
would like to comment and make an addition to that, though, and you'll probably disagree with me. But we see several places, like in Zechariah, and also in Jeremiah and Isaiah, where it talks about all flesh coming before God, Shabbat for Shabbat, and the Chodesh, and so forth. I can't hear you. Something happened. I don't have any sound. I'm going to keep talking. I hope I have sound. Can you hear me? Somebody type a 1 if you can hear me. Okay, good. You can still hear me. So there's these verses where it talks about all flesh. Now, when you look in Zechariah, where it talks about the people coming up for Sukkot, it's clear that it's not talking about every nation in the world, because it says of all those who came against Jerusalem. All right, this was their job. It wasn't talking about everybody on the planet had to come to Jerusalem. It just said of the people who are left of those nations that come against Jerusalem at that time, they would be required to come because that's their fine, or however you want to talk about it. But we know that in other places of the prophetical writings, it talks about the people who will be worshiping from their place. They will worship God from their place. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to come up to Jerusalem. And logically speaking, there's no way you would think people would have to come to Jerusalem every Shabbat and every new moon. Can you just imagine that? That makes no sense at all. They only work for people who might be living in Israel today. Yep, I can hear you again. Today, the land of Israel, you can basically drive across it in a few hours, so that wouldn't be a big deal. But back in those days, it took 3 days for Abraham to go from Beersheba to Jerusalem. We don't know what kind of pace he kept, but can you imagine everyone coming every Shabbat and every first of every month to Jerusalem from anywhere in Israel? That's just insane. So I don't think that when it says all flesh, that it's speaking of everybody in the world. Specifically in Zechariah, it says of those who remain, of all the people who came against Jerusalem. of those people. They're going to be the ones who are required to come for Sukkot.
I think the implication is a representative from each nation. I don't think it says all the peoples, meaning all the different nations. So if Donald Trump comes and Putin comes and the king of the United Arab Emirates comes, they all bow down before God and then they get their reign.
Let me see if I can find the verse I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Where are you, Ziki?
I missed what you said before because I couldn't hear anything and you guys couldn't hear me.
I was just basically explaining that.
Yeah, the internet sucks here.
Then when it talks about the nations coming,
Right. Yeah. I'm sorry, and I think it was Zechariah 7:14. I think it's Zechariah 14:7 actually. My mistake.
14:7.
Yeah.
No. So here's verse 16. I'm gonna post it on the screen for you.
Oh yeah. Okay, there it is. My mistake. 14:16. Okay.
There. Oh man, that's all jumbled up there.
That's big.
So it says وَهَيَا خُلْ حَنُوثَارْ مِكُلْ حَقُويِمْ حَبَيِّمْ عَلْ يَرُوشَلَايِمْ وَعَلُوا مِدَيْ شَنَا بِشَنَا لِهِشْتَحَوُوث لِمَلَخ أَضُنَا سَبَعُوث وَلَحُوغ إِذْ حَقْ حَسُكُوث. And so it will be that those remaining Hanuthar, the surplus of those, that this doesn't actually say those who survive. That would be Nish'ar. And so it comes to pass that everyone who is left of all those nations that came against Jerusalem shall go up year to year to worship the King, Adonai of hosts, and to keep or to celebrate the feast of Sukkot. And so that's why I say, it's not talking about every single nation, everybody will come up there, but those who actually went against Jerusalem make war, just like in Isaiah, Jeremiah, when it talks about all flesh will come month to month and Sabbath to Sabbath to worship God. It doesn't mean everybody in the world. Can you imagine that? You wouldn't have time to do anything but travel.
Yeah, but just to point out, all of the nations, the prophecy it's not saying that just those who attack Jerusalem. It's basically saying every single nation. In other words, there's going to be all the nations will team up and attack Jerusalem. Many people will die, but whatever nations remain afterwards on this earth will have to go up, or expected to come up year to year, to send a representative. All the people send a representative of that nation to go up to Jerusalem each year and worship God. And if they don't, then that nation will not receive rain, because it couldn't be speaking about individuals. Farmer John went up to Jerusalem, and his next door neighbor Farmer Joe didn't, and so it's going to rain on Farmer John's plot of land, but it's not going to rain on Farmer Joe's plot of land, right? That doesn't make sense. So we're talking about nation by nation of all of the nations. They all went against the Jerusalem. That's explicitly, that's in here. That's in Zechariah 14:2. I just have the English version in front of me. So I will gather all the nations of Jerusalem to fight against it. Yeah. The city will be captured, the house ransacked, and the women raped, heifers, blah, 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 blah. So all of the nations.
Yeah. Well, personally, I look at this situation in Zechariah as being the same described in Ezekiel, especially when you look at how they're consumed on the mountains, which is what it actually says in Ezekiel is going to happen to these people. But it actually says in Ezekiel, it lists the nations that'll be coming against it. It's not every nation on the planet. It's just a certain confederation of people.
Well, I think when it does that, it's talking just about nations that I don't think that's an exhaustive list of all the nations. I think that what it's doing there is just basically saying certain nations that Israel knows from the past are going to come against
Israel at that point.
Interestingly though, all those nations that are listed in Ezekiel are currently at odds with Israel today. Well, they're not all defunct. Some what we call those nations today are basically the inheritors of that land. Those places, they actually have been, up until recently, all of them has been at odds with Israel. Interesting.
Anywho, any final questions before we close it up?
Man, I appreciate it.
It's been a long study, but it's been a good one. I love this stuff.
It's getting longer. Well, I'll probably cut off the first couple minutes anyway, so it won't be three.
Yeah.
It won't be 4 hours. It'll be 3 hours.
Whatever it is. Maybe we should do shorter ones as well for people who can tune in for 3 hours, because that does get pretty intense. But I guess the idea is to come in and go as you wish.
Yeah. I really appreciate everyone joining. I love the interaction. I love the questions. Melech and I have to explain. We sound like we hate each other sometimes, but that's
not at all, man. Not at all. I love Yaakov, man. I spent a couple of weeks, 1 week in his house, and other weeks where we were still there. And no, man, I honestly consider Yaakov one of my best friends, really. And even though we haven't spent that much time together face to face, I have more of a connection with Yaakov than I have with many other people, just because we have so much in common in terms of our love for the Torah and the traditions of Israel and to learn. And no, not at all. So we argue, but
it's we both have our own opinions and our own ways. Mine are certainly not always the same as Melech's, but what we agree on is that we're going to follow the Torah. I'm going to do the Torah. I want the Torah to be supreme. But I believe in the articles of what we call Qara'ism, and that's what I want to hold up to the world, and I do that by example. How you see me here, this is how I live every day of my life. This is not just, I'm not just here on YouTube or wherever presenting this face. There's people who know me, who've been in my life, who they'll tell you this is what I live this daily. Yep. And I know Melech is the same way, and we're hoping this love for Torah will catch on.
Yep.
And grow. That's what I want to see.
Yep. Same here.
So tell your friends about us.
Exactly, and your enemies, and your acquaintances. Just stop random people on the street and tell them as well.
Yeah. Really. So anyways, I want to wish everyone a Shabbat Shalom who's still in Shabbat, and also a Shavua Tov. It's here now, the first day of the week, for anybody on the eastern side of the world. I guess we are on the eastern side of the world. From the United States, we're on the eastern side.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Under the dome.
Right. Under the dome. So anyway, yep. So Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov to everyone, and same time, same place next week. Parashath No'ah, and we will hopefully see everybody there, and more people. So that's it.
All right.
All right. So Shabbat Shalom. 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 Bye.